Chapter 525. When Jurassic Park began the last period of high-intensity publicity before its release, on May 28, Carlock Pictures' first summer movie, Peak of the Mountain, officially opened on more than 2,300 screens. The release of this movie also marked the arrival of the 1993 summer movie. Peak of the Mountain starred Sylvester Stallone. It told the story of the rescue team member played by Stallone and his companions who encountered a group of bandits on the snow mountain and were reborn in despair. The movie cost $70 million and was produced by Carlock Pictures, which was supported by German capital, and was distributed by MGM, which had just undergone restructuring. There was also an episode in this. Carlock Pictures movie was originally distributed by Columbia. However, after Columbia reached a cooperation agreement with Firefly last year, Peter Guber cancelled the cooperation with Carlock Pictures. After the fraud of the Italian businessman Giancarlo, MGM was taken over by the creditor Credit Lyonnais of France. Credit Lyonnais, which held the control, auctioned MGM at the end of last year. However, no one was willing to take over. Credit Lyonnais restructured MGM and poached Frank Marcheso, John Carrier and others, who had been executives at Warner Brothers, to form a management team. In the process of MGM's restructuring, Carlock Pictures happened to be looking for a distributor for its own movie. The new management team, which urgently needed to reverse the decline of MGM, signed a distribution agreement with Carlock. However, fantasy is beautiful, reality is always cruel. Although Stallone's performance was very hard, and there was no lack of dangerous scenes in the movie, Peak of the Mountain was released on May 28, and only got $16 million in the first 3 days, accompanied by a sound of criticism from the critics. Most of the film critics gave the movie a low score, claiming that the plot of the movie was old-fashioned and naive, and that they could completely guess the rest of the plot of the movie after only 10 minutes. Moreover, a scene in the movie where the protagonist burned money to keep warm also became the focus of a large number of media ridicule. The movie cost $70 million, and MGM spent another $30 million for the publicity of the movie. The huge cost of $100 million was indeed no different from burning money. Moreover, the quality of the movie did not burn at all after burning so much money. Although the result of $16 million in 3 days in the first week was not too miserable, with the release of Jurassic Park in the second week, most box office analysts estimated that the North American box office of Peak of the Mountain would stop in the range of $50 million, even less than half of the total cost of Peak of the Mountain. The box office in North America is so bleak, and other distribution channels will not be too ideal. The situation of the producer and distribution company's huge losses is almost doomed. Of course, the management team of MGM was not willing to take over the film company and release such a bleak situation in the first heavyweight film released. After the box office of Peak of the Mountain was released on the first weekend, the senior management of MGM held an emergency meeting. After some discussion, they quickly came up with a response plan. Because the reviews of Peak of the Mountain were already very difficult to reverse, MGM decided to find another way. The next day, a large number of articles appeared in many newspapers complaining about Peak of the Mountain, claiming that the film quality of Peak of the Mountain was not as bad as the critics said, and that the reason for the one-sided situation was completely because of the wantonly smearing by the competitors. As soon as these articles came out, it immediately caused a lot of response. The release date of Jurassic Park was just a week after the release of Peak of the Mountain, and the other movies released at the same time were not as heavyweight as Peak of the Mountain and Jurassic Park. Therefore, the competitors mentioned in these articles could not be more obvious. Therefore, after many people saw this news, they subconsciously sympathized with the tragic experience of Peak of the Mountain. In the face of Firefly Pictures' increasingly strong position in Hollywood, the media controlled by other film companies did not mind adding fuel to the fire and adding some trouble to Firefly. In just a few days, the media formed a trend of crusading against the evil forces of the film industry. At the same time, Jurassic Park entered its last week of intense publicity. In addition to more intense print and television advertising campaigns, since May 25, the main creative team of Jurassic Park began a promotional tour in major North American cities, and held test screenings in New York, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Boston, Philadelphia, and other places. In the face of the media's crusade against Peak of the Mountain being smeared, Firefly Pictures remained silent. Firefly's silence did not mean that some people would allow Firefly to remain silent. MGM's goal was to provoke a confrontation between the two movies and achieve the effect of Peak of the Mountain's box office rebound effect. However, in the process of Jurassic Park's promotional tour, basically the media that were on good terms with Firefly were basically invited, and MGM had not found any opportunity to do so. Because Jurassic Park was scheduled to be released at the same time in the UK, the main creative team had to fly to London on June 3 to attend the premiere in the UK. The North American premiere was scheduled on June 2, 2 days before Jurassic Park was released. As usual, the North American premiere was held at the famous Chinese Grand Theatre in Hollywood. The premiere started smoothly, but after the media's Q&A session, a reporter asked Eric abruptly after it was his turn, "Mr. Williams, about the recent smearing of Peak of the Mountain, starring Mr. Stallone, what do you think?" Hearing this question, Charlie West, who was in charge of organizing the premiere, broke out in a cold sweat, and the atmosphere at the scene immediately fell into a state of stagnation. Before this, it was not that Firefly did not discuss this matter internally, but Eric's final result was to deal with it coldly and not give any response. Firefly's distribution department also executed very well, but they did not expect such a big mistake to occur at such an important occasion like the premiere. Charlie West wiped the cold sweat from his forehead and stood at the exit of the backstage looking down at the stage. The executive wanted to rush up and strangle the reporter who asked the question. After all, Fox TV was broadcasting the premiere live. "Mr. West, do you want to pause the broadcast?" Charlie West was a little overwhelmed, and the head of Fox TV had already come over. Charlie West glared at the other party. "Isn't this nonsense? The question just now has been broadcast live. Suddenly cutting off the broadcast is like slapping the face of the person on the stage." Eric held the microphone in his hand and was silent for a moment with everyone else. After seeing the news a few days ago, Eric more or less understood the ins and outs of the matter. Not to mention this life, even in his previous life, when he was not completely integrated into the industry, he had seen too many similar situations. If Magnificent Peak was a good movie and had a lot of fans, then MGM's method would have had a concrete impact. Unfortunately, Magnificent Peak was just a very mediocre popcorn movie, and it was impossible to form a die-hard fan base. Therefore, although MGM's tactics would cause some people to sympathize with Magnificent Peak and buy tickets to support it, most ordinary people would still maintain the attitude of a bystander. At the same time, Firefly did not do anything to defame Magnificent Peak, so MGM could not obtain any substantial evidence to prove this point. They did not dare to blatantly name Jurassic Park, so they could only use some ambiguous words to mislead the readers. What MGM wanted was for Firefly to take the initiative to respond. Once that happened, it would be justified for MGM to fight back against Firefly's remarks, and it would also create an established fact in the hearts of ordinary people. But now, facing the camera lens of the live broadcast, Eric knew that he had to respond on the spot. After thinking for a moment, Eric picked up the microphone again and asked the reporter, "Sir, do you have a lot of friends?" The reporter was stunned. Although he did not know why Eric suddenly asked this, he instinctively became alert. "Mr. Williams, this has nothing to do with my question. Please answer my question directly, okay?" Eric stared at the reporter sharply and said in a deep voice, "Your question has nothing to do with this premiere, but I've decided to answer you. So, tell me first, do you have a lot of friends?" The reporter felt the pressure from Eric's gaze and subconsciously shrank his neck and blurted out, "Yes. Yes, I mean, I have a lot of friends." "Then, do you often discuss topics about movies with your friends?" The reporter thought that he had calmed down and said, "Yes, Mr. Williams, I'm an entertainment reporter, so they often ask me some questions about movies." At this point, the reporter was shocked again. He subconsciously thought that Eric had led him into a trap. He thought that Eric would ask him whether Magnificent Peak was good or bad. However, Eric did not continue to ask. Instead, he said, "Okay, then I can answer you now about my opinion on your question. Hollywood movies have been developed for more than 80 years now, and movies have become an indispensable part of everyone's entertainment life. Even if many people don't go to the cinema, they can still watch movies through TV, video, and other channels. Such a long time is enough to develop the ability of ordinary people to judge whether a movie is good or bad. Mr. Williams. When the reporter heard that Eric still did not directly answer his question, he was about to interrupt, but when he met Eric's sharp eyes, he immediately changed his words. Eric continued, "Everyone's judgment of whether a movie is good or bad does not depend on the amount of investment in the movie. Otherwise, the movie Throat Island 2 years ago would probably be the box office champion of that year." Hearing this, everyone present laughed, and the reporter couldn't help but ask at this time, "Mr. Williams, you didn't answer my question." "Well, I'll answer your question. I have no opinion on the matter you just mentioned. The promotion of a movie is just an advertising means to let people know that such a movie is about to be released. In fact, whether a person will choose to watch this movie, in addition to the word of mouth in the newspaper, the most important criterion is how the people around them talk about this movie. Just like you just said, your friends will ask you, an entertainment reporter, whether a movie is good or bad. So, if you think that a movie has been discredited, then ask your friends who have seen this movie. If they say it is good, then you can go to the cinema to watch it. If they don't think it is good, then you don't have to watch it. That's all." Speaking of this, Eric smiled and said to the camera, "Of course, this method is also effective for Jurassic Park. You don't have to pay attention to any comments on Jurassic Park in the media. You can just decide whether you want to watch this movie based on the feelings of your friends." Hearing Eric's confident tone, the audience at the premiere couldn't help but applaud. The reporter who tried to stir up trouble sat down and didn't continue to pester Lou Zhou. At this time, in front of thousands of televisions, many viewers who originally felt sympathy for the discrediting of Magnificent Peak silently changed their minds. Although many people still didn't completely side with the innocent side of Firefly, many people were no longer so indignant. Instead, they decided to ask around for their opinions on Magnificent Peak. After the reporter sat down, the host of the premiere looked at Eric and asked if he wanted to continue the Q&A session. Eric nodded gently. The host continued to call for other reporters while hoping that another person wouldn't jump out to cause trouble. "Mr. Williams, I heard that you were very confident. Also, Firefly broke the rules and arranged 3,000 screens for Jurassic Park. So, do you have your own box office expectations for Jurassic Park?" This time, it was a black-haired woman with glasses who spoke. Her question was also very normal. After hearing this question, many people in the audience couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. Eric looked at the woman and smiled as he said, "You know, before a movie is released, whether it's the distribution company or some professional organizations, they all have their own box office predictions. I'm sure you've seen the answer to this question in many newspapers. Of course, most of the predictions say that the box office of Jurassic Park in North America will be between US $200 million to US $300 million, the female reporter replied skillfully. She then looked at Eric and said, "However, I think everyone is more curious. Since Mr. Williams can break the rules and arrange 3,000 screens for this movie, what is your box office expectation?" Chapter 527. Jurassic Park is aiming for $1 billion box office. There is a disruptor at the premiere of Jurassic Park. Williams announced that the new film will hit the global box office of $1 billion. The director of Jurassic Park has made a bold statement of $1 billion, and it is an inventory of the movies with the potential of $1 billion box office in the history of Hollywood. Unsurprisingly, the day after the premiere, the media exploded because of Eric's words last night. If Eric had advertised that the box office of Jurassic Park was expected to be $1.5 or $2 billion, it would have definitely been treated as a joke by most of the media. But this figure happened to be $1 billion, which was only $200 million away from Hollywood's current highest box office record. However, although this gap seemed to be within reach, no one has been able to break through it. As early as 1977, the first Star Wars that came out of nowhere swept the global box office of $770 million. But in the following 10 years, although there were many movies with a global box office of more than $700 million, no movie could break through the figure of $800 million. Therefore, some professional box office evaluation agencies have said more than once that $800 million may be the global box office limit of a movie. However, in recent years, as long as people who care about the film industry can clearly find that the world film market is expanding at a speed visible to the naked eye. Therefore, Eric's prediction of $1 billion for Jurassic Park formed two distinct factions in just one day, and both sides seem to be able to come up with very sufficient evidence to prove that they were correct. The mutual conflict in the media has once again hyped the topic of Jurassic Park to the highest point. At the same time, Eric's intention of releasing these words has been successfully achieved. Not many people care about the bare peak of the mountain anymore. After receiving the call from Eric's assistant, Mario, Kasser, CEO of Carlock Pictures, was both angry and aggrieved. Although he knew a little about that matter, it was the MGM distribution team that proposed the specific plan and implementation, which really had little to do with him. Although he was wronged, Mario, Kasser did not dare to ignore it. He contacted the person in charge of MGM overnight and firmly stopped MGM from continuing to rely on Jurassic Park for hype. Of course, MGM did not agree at first, but after hearing Mario Kasser repeated the phone call he received, they had to give up. Carlock did not dare to offend Firefly, and MGM, which was in a precarious situation, did not dare to do so. The North American premiere of Jurassic Park was held on Wednesday, June 2nd. Therefore, although the topic of $1 billion box office that Eric threw out caused controversy, this dispute did not have time to reach a white-hot level. Because the day after the topic was created, it was the day Jurassic Park was released in 3,000 theaters in the United States. Everyone knew that in a few days, the real box office numbers would become the most convincing tool. It was another day of solid 6-hour training. At 5 o'clock in the afternoon, the exhausted three girls returned to the apartment and collapsed in their bedrooms as usual to recover their energy. Originally, they thought that after enduring the initial period, the following training would be much easier. However, they recently discovered that their training schedule gradually increased with the passage of time. Although it did not reach the limit they could bear, it was definitely enough to exhaust all their energy for a day. It was not until it was dark outside that the three girls strolled out of the bedroom. Penelope was the last to come out. Seeing the two girls watching TV in the living room, she asked, "What are we eating tonight?" "Whatever," replied Theron. "It doesn't matter," said Kate. "Oh, I've never eaten the two dishes you mentioned," joked Penelope as she walked to the kitchen. The three girls agreed to take turns cooking, and today was her turn. After a simple dinner, the three girls gathered on the sofa in the living room again to watch TV. Time often flew when they were bored. Before they knew it, it was already 10 o'clock at night. Charlize Theron glanced at Penelope, who was absent-mindedly holding a fashion magazine on the left, and then looked at Kate, who was staring at the TV on the right. "Hey, you guys." Huh? The two girls did not change their posture, but they each made a sound of confusion. Charlize Theron keenly felt something was wrong, but he glanced at the clock on the wall and asked, "Did you guys buy tickets?" "What? Tickets?" Charlize Theron paused for a moment before slowly spitting out two words, "Jurassic Park." Silence. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. Then, Kate and Penelope laughed together. As they laughed, they talked about someone's past. "Haha, who was the one who said last night that if you want to buy a ticket, you should give it to a homeless person?" Penelope said. She even imitated Charlie's accent and repeated, "I'm definitely not going." "Haha, Penny, do you know, this situation is called..." "Ah, why did you hit me?" You're still hitting me?" "Don't think I can't beat you. Take this." Hoo, puff 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 puff. After fooling around for a while, the three girls walked out of the apartment together. Kate and Penelope were still laughing, and the embarrassment on Charlize's face did not completely disappear. From time to time, he would bicker with the other two girls. They drove all the way to downtown Santa Monica, parked the car, and walked in front of a cinema. The three girls were surprised to find a long line in front of the cinema. There were at least 100 people. "Don't tell me they're all here to watch Jurassic Park?" Penelope asked, a little surprised. There will definitely be other movies screening tomorrow, but Jurassic Park is the only movie that can make fans line up overnight to buy tickets. Kate looked at the crowd and took out the tickets she bought in the morning with a sense of superiority. Then, she suddenly turned to Charlize. "Charlie, am I right?" "It's none of my business." Charlize reached out and snatched a ticket from Kate, turned around, and walked away. "I'm going to buy popcorn first. You two wait here." "I want the creamy one," Penelope ordered hastily. She watched Charlize leave, and Penelope and Kate walked into the lobby of the cinema. It was already 11:30. Under the bright lights in the hall, the two girls found the entrance of the screening room. Looking at the continuous stream of people walking in, they couldn't help but say, "It would be great if this scene could appear in our movie in the future." "I heard that the script was written by Eric Williams himself. None of his previous scripts have failed. I think it will definitely be very popular," Kate said. "I hope so. I don't want to go back to Spain. I might not be able to get a movie there for a long time. My chances are better if I stay in Hollywood." After Penelope finished speaking, she inexplicably sighed, "It's been more than a month." Although this sentence seemed a little confusing, Kate knew that Penelope was referring to the fact that the two of them had been in Hollywood for more than a month, but Eric Williams hadn't appeared. Before this, only Charlize Theron had seen him once. The level between the two was too far apart. Of course, Kate couldn't guess his daily life. However, she also felt that since Eric Williams could do so many things at such a young age, he must be very busy. As for Penelope's thoughts, it was even easier to guess. She had been in Hollywood for more than a month, and she had almost gotten every detail of her meeting with Eric Williams from Charlize Theron. Although Charlize was the only one among the three of them who had met Williams once, Penelope was the one who was most familiar with him. Therefore, it was obvious what she was thinking. However, Kate wasn't optimistic about Penelope's thoughts. Eric Williams was not only a Hollywood director, but also a billionaire. Such a Hollywood super-rich guy had countless women eyeing him. How could Penelope, a Spanish girl who had just arrived, have a turn? After a while, Charlize came over with a bunch of snacks. The two girls picked some and walked into the screening room together. Wow, there are so many people. Just now, they saw people coming in continuously, but after walking into the screening room, they found that there were only a few empty seats in the 200-seat screening room. "It's all your fault. It took so long to buy snacks," Penelope said to Charlize. Charlize was unwilling. "How can you blame me? You were the one who wanted the creamy popcorn. It just happened to be sold out, so I could only wait for a while." Kate interrupted the two girls. "Stop arguing, you two. Look at the front, there are still a few empty seats. Let's hurry over." The empty seats with excellent views had long been sold out, so the three girls could only find 3 consecutive empty seats in the second row at the front and sit down. Not long after they sat down, the lights in the screening room dimmed. The story began outside an unknown building. Heavily armed workers carefully docked a container with the entrance of the building. However, although they were very cautious, an accident still happened. A worker was suddenly dragged into the container by something. Although a few electric batons were immediately inserted into the container, only half of the worker's body was left when he was dragged out. In a flash, the eyes of a beast filled with murderous intent were revealed. Seeing this eye, the audience in the cinema who were attracted by the frightening atmosphere created by the beginning of the movie and held their breaths began to whisper. "That was the dinosaur's eye just now, right?" Penelope whispered. Charlize shrugged and said disdainfully, "See, it's still deliberately mystifying like in the trailer, only showing a part of it." Kate whispered, "Charlie, this is obviously your personal prejudice. At least I feel that the eye just now is like a living thing. There's no trace of a model at all. You must know that this is a dinosaur, not a real live lion or tiger. Since Eric Williams can make the eye so realistic, then a complete dinosaur will definitely not disappoint us." "Yes, I think so too," Penelope nodded in agreement. As the three chatted, the scene began to switch between the amber mine in the Dominican Republic and the dinosaur fossil excavation site. The audience gradually understood the cause of all this. Because of the loss of life during the transportation of the dinosaur, Dr. Hammond's project was temporarily suspended by the investors. In order to continue the Jurassic Park project, Dr. Hammond invited dinosaur archaeologist Dr. Alan Grant, chaos scientist Malcolm, and his lawyer to visit the dinosaur island in Costa Rica. He wanted these influential people in the industry to express their support for the Jurassic Park project. At the same time, he also invited his grandson and granddaughter. This was the cause of all this adventure. On the helicopter to Costa Rica, Dr. Hammond did not reveal his true purpose in order to shock these people. The group landed on the island's helipad and took a jeep to the base. When they passed by a flat grassland, the people who were originally discussing their own topics suddenly became sluggish and revealed a shocked expression. The camera turned and swept across the crowd's field of vision. The audience in the theater suddenly let out a faint cry of surprise. On the grassland, several 7-meter-tall long-necked dinosaurs were leisurely strolling on the grassland. A long-necked dinosaur even stopped and tiptoed to eat the tender leaves on the top of a tree. When it landed, because of its heavy body, it produced a muffled bang and shook the ground. Seeing this scene in the dim light, Kate stared at the screen and said to Charlize, "What do you say now?" In any case, these are all fake." Charlize was still stubborn. The two women gently smiled and ignored her. The camera continued to move forward. After the long-necked dinosaurs, in the vast field of vision, groups of all kinds of dinosaurs appeared. Once again, the audience feasted their eyes. After giving the audience a small surprise, the plot began to move into the main topic. The group arrived at the dinosaur hatching base and observed the resurrection process of the dinosaurs. Although a researcher said that all the dinosaurs in the park were female, chaos scientist Malcolm still expressed a strong concern about this kind of behavior that reversed the development of nature. After visiting the dinosaur hatching base, Dr. Hammond arranged for Dr. Grant and his two grandsons to sit in a self-driving jeep and tour the Jurassic Park. The real adventure began. Throughout the tour, there were endless problems. None of the dinosaurs were very supportive. The first Triceratops they encountered was also sick. At the same time, Fatty Dennis, who was in charge of the park's programming, secretly turned off the park's power grid in order to steal the dinosaur embryos. Tyrannosaurus rex, Velociraptor and other carnivorous dinosaurs escaped their cages and caused a series of disasters. Chapter 528. Due to the disaster caused by the power outage, the plot entered its most thrilling period. Although many of the audience had already realized that something terrible was about to happen, when the T-Rex appeared in front of them with its terrifying footsteps, many of them couldn't help but cry out in surprise. The narrative was also divided into several strands. Multi-strand narration was often very difficult to grasp. If the director didn't grasp it well, it could arouse disgust from the audience by abruptly switching scenes at a moment when the audience was very interested in the plot. However, Jurassic Park didn't have the slightest such a problem. Whether it was the fat programmer who rushed to the dock with the embryos and was killed by the T-Rex, or the Jeep team that encountered the T-Rex, they all tugged at the heartstrings of the audience. Countless examples had already proven that if a movie only had grand scenes or exquisite special effects, it often wouldn't be able to achieve outstanding box office sales. However, Jurassic Park had perfectly combined the best special effects technology of this era with a wonderful story with ups and downs. It allowed the audience to enjoy a visual feast of the resurrection of an ancient behemoth. At the same time, they also experienced a strange adventure filled with screams along with the protagonists in the movie. 2 hours of adventure unknowingly passed by, and the movie finally came to an end. When Dr. Settler escaped from the dinosaur incubation base with his female assistant and 2 children, everyone heaved a deep sigh of relief as if they had escaped with their lives. When the credits slowly rose along with the ending music, most of the audience in the cinema didn't immediately get up and leave. Instead, they discussed the various plots of the movie with their companions. Starting from the second half of the movie, the 3 girls stopped whispering to each other. Instead, they focused their attention on the big screen. At first, they complained about not being able to get a better seat. But soon, they realized that because they were very close to the big screen, the first few rows of audience members got a better view of the movie. When the Tyrannosaurus rex opened its mouth and chased after the jeep that Malcolm and the others were in through the forest corridor, some of them even subconsciously leaned back to avoid it. After the lights came back on, the reluctant crowd finally began to leave the theater one after another. The three girls also followed the crowd out of the theater. Hearing the couple beside her mumbling that it wasn't enough and that they wanted to watch it again, Kate looked at the other two women and said, "Charlie, Penny, what do you think about watching it again tomorrow?" "Okay," Penelope immediately nodded and said, "I've watched Tornado several times last year. I thought that the special effects in that movie were already a miracle. I still remember the scene of the Level 5 tornado. I didn't expect to see an even more exciting dinosaur scene in this movie. I must watch it again, no, twice." The three of them walked to the parking lot as they talked. Charlie took out his keys and opened the car door. He said, "3 times is fine, but tomorrow is Friday, not the weekend. Look at the time. If you guys are too excited to sleep, you might be late tomorrow." Penelope quickly looked at her watch and said, "It's already 2 o'clock, she said as she crawled into the back seat of the car. "Let's go back. I don't want to be punished by doing the horse stance. That's the most horrible torture I've ever seen in my life." "How is that torture? Didn't you hear Master Yuan say that if they were lazy when they were practicing martial arts when they were young, they would be punished by not eating for an entire day? They would even be beaten with such thick thorns on their backs," Charlie said as he started the car. He even used one hand to gesture the thorns that he had never seen before. "He must be scaring us," Penelope said indifferently. Although her family wasn't very well off when she was young and she was only the daughter of a hairdresser, she had never been punished by a teacher when she was dancing in elementary school. Therefore, it was difficult for her to understand what the Eastern martial arts master that Firefly had invited for them said. At this time, Kate interrupted and said, "I don't think he's scaring us. I remember when I was in high school, I went to watch a box of Eastern movies with my classmates. I don't remember the name, but it was about Eastern children learning to perform in a drama academy. Those children were only 6 or 7 years old, but they were often beaten and scolded. They seemed to call it something like a strict teacher produces outstanding students." When Penelope heard Kate's words, a mischievous smile suddenly appeared at the corner of her mouth. She looked at her and said, "After hearing what you said, I finally understand what Master Yuan meant when he looked at you at the beginning of the training. He obviously wanted to beat you up, but he couldn't do it. He must be feeling very uncomfortable in his heart. Get lost, I didn't learn how to dance as long as the two of you." Kate reached out and tickled Penelope's waist. Although she had barely reached the standard after more than a month of training, there was still a big gap between her and the two girls who had a solid foundation. Therefore, she hated being teased by Penelope and Charlie the most. Although it was 2 o'clock in the morning in Los Angeles, the streets were still not deserted. However, the traffic had decreased by a lot. Charlie listened helplessly to the two girls playing in the back seat. She quietly stepped on the accelerator and sped up. She wanted to go back and rest as soon as possible. She also didn't want to be late for tomorrow's training. Although the Eastern person in charge of their training would not punish them physically, a staff member of Firefly would often supervise their various performances at the training site. Although she didn't say it out loud, after watching Jurassic Park, Charlie was shocked. At the same time, she also had greater expectations for the upcoming movie Thunderbolt Charming Baby. Since it was a movie written by that guy, even if it couldn't be compared to Jurassic Park, it would definitely be very good. Compared to Charlie and the other two girls who were relaxed after watching the movie, many people were not so relaxed that night. On a street in Beverly Hills, Michael Eisner also walked out of the cinema at about the same time. Although Eisner said that he wanted to attend the screening of Jurassic Park in a phone call with Eric, and although Firefly sent an invitation letter later, Michael Eisner still found an excuse to refuse. However, not attending the screening didn't mean that he didn't care about Jurassic Park. As early as Jurassic Park had just started pre-selling tickets, he had asked his assistant to help him book tickets for the midnight screening. Ordinary movie fans basically treated the viewing process as entertainment. After watching it, they would be satisfied, but Michael Eisner saw something deeper from Jurassic Park. The plot structure of this movie was, of course, very good, but this was not what Michael Eisner cared about the most. Hollywood didn't lack screenwriters who could write good scripts, nor did it lack directors who could make good movies with good scripts. What he cared about most was the level of special effects shown in Jurassic Park. If Tornado had just opened a window a year ago, then Michael Eisner was sure that the appearance of Jurassic Park would completely open the door to a new era of special effects movies. If the big Hollywood studios wanted to survive and develop better, they could only follow the trend of this era. Firefly Pictures would undoubtedly become the leader of this era. Thinking of these things, Michael Eisner stood by the road for a while. A middle-aged man quickly walked over with another man and woman behind him. "Mr. Eisner," the middle-aged man greeted and was about to introduce, but Michael Eisner waved his hand and said, "What's the result?" The middle-aged man winked at the young man on his left. The young man opened a folder and handed a piece of paper to Michael Eisner. He said, "Mr. Eisner, our company has completed the statistics of 100 screening halls of Jurassic Park in Los Angeles according to your instructions. These are all 200-seat venues. After statistics, the average number of audience in 100 screening halls is 159. The occupancy rate is 79.5%, and the single theater box office is about $1,500. At this point, the young man looked up at Michael Eisner's face with some apprehension. Seeing that the other party's expression didn't change, he continued, "With the density of cinemas in Los Angeles, we expect this occupancy rate to be relatively low in the country. Therefore, our company's total box office for the midnight screening of Jurassic Park is estimated to be $4.5 million. At this point, the young man stopped and waited for Michael Eisner's continued instructions. Michael Eisner softly recited the figure of $4.5 million before asking with uncertainty, "Before this, which movie had the highest midnight box office record?" The young man did not hesitate and blurted out, "The first Batman 4 years ago, $21 million. However, there were only 2,200 screens for Batman." Michael Eisner could tell that the young man's last sentence might be to flatter or comfort him, but he did not feel comforted at all. A simple calculation showed that the midnight box office of Batman was only $1,000, which was one-third less than that of Jurassic Park. If the scale of fans was compared, the fans of Batman's decades of serialization in North America definitely far exceeded that of the novel Jurassic Park. Therefore, the beautiful midnight box office of Jurassic Park was definitely not as simple as fans. Moreover, Michael Eisner vaguely remembered that the first week box office of Batman 4 years ago was about $60 million. The midnight box office of Jurassic Park more than doubled the record set by Batman. Then, what would the first week box office of Jurassic Park be? What would the box office potential of Jurassic Park be in the future? Perhaps $1 billion might not be the final limit of this movie. After standing there for a few minutes, the cold night wind gently swept over his body. Michael Eisner came back to his senses and said to the middle-aged man, "Mark, ask the company's planning department to keep an eye on all the information about the subsequent release of Jurassic Park. I want to see a detailed report every day. In addition, within a week, ask them to produce an analysis of the early publicity methods of Jurassic Park. Tell Chris that I can let bygones be bygones, but this is his last chance. If the report in a week doesn't satisfy me, he can pack up and leave." "I understand, Mr. Eisner." The middle-aged man nodded. The young man and woman, who might be employees of a data research company, consciously lowered their heads and pretended to be absent-minded. Obviously, they did not want to be involved in the internal struggles of these large corporations. Michael Eisner discussed something with the middle-aged man in a low voice, then got into a black car and drove away. At the same time, similar things were happening in the corners of Los Angeles, the center of Hollywood. Although the executives of several other film companies might not be as attentive as Michael Eisner, they all put their minds on this matter. When Mario Kassar, the CEO of Carlock Pictures, heard the news, he could only be described as depressed. The failure of Bear Peak of the Hill was a foregone conclusion. Originally, Mario Kassar expected Arnold Schwarzenegger's The Last Action Hero to make a comeback next week. However, Jurassic Park was so aggressive that the midnight box office not only broke the midnight box office record in Hollywood, but also doubled the number. Under the influence of Jurassic Park, next week, The Last Action Hero would not be able to do well. The total investment of Bear Peak of the Hill and The Last Action Hero exceeded $150 million, which was exactly twice that of Jurassic Park. Even if the two movies failed, because all the funds came from outsiders, it would not have much impact on Mario Kassar's personal assets. However, with such a huge loss of funds, it would be even more difficult for Carlock Pictures to obtain large sums of money from investors in the future. With a heavy heart, Mario Kassar also forgot the time. He couldn't help but pick up the phone and dial the number of MGM's president, John Carley. When the beeping sound rang, Mario Kassar realized that it was more than 2 o'clock in the morning. Just as he was about to hang up, the other end was connected. John Carley on the other end of the phone was obviously not in a good mood. In order to release these two movies, MGM raised $60 million and planned to go all out. They did not expect to encounter the rampaging behemoth of Jurassic Park. Now that the publicity fee has been spent, the screening contract with the cinema has been signed, and the 2,000 yuan opening screen has been confirmed. There is no possibility of a delay in the schedule. After Eric's warning, Carlock and MGM did not dare to play any dirty tricks. After all, if they did nothing, they could still linger on. If they angered Firefly, they could face bankruptcy in minutes. Moreover, with the box office potential of Jurassic Park, those small tricks would not have any effect. Hollywood has never heard of a blockbuster movie that caused the box office to plummet because of a scandal in the middle of its release. Mario Kassar and John Carley said some dry words on the phone and hung up discouraged. The next day, the midnight box office of Jurassic Park was released, and the result of $59 million immediately caused an uproar in the American media. In addition to the conservative film critics who lamented that Jurassic Park would bring a disastrous change in the art of cinema, more than 90% of the media praised Jurassic Park. Everyone knew that there was nothing to nitpick about the quality of the movie itself or the commercial value it showed. Picking bones in eggs and forcibly smearing it would only be mocked. In this jubilation, the box office of Jurassic Park in the following days was released one after another. June 4th, Friday, 21 million. June 5th, Saturday, 24 million. June 6th, Sunday, 22 million. This series of box office data, in the eyes of the industry, can only be described as crazy, because more than 80% of Hollywood movies that can enter the cinema on a large scale, the total box office is not necessarily more than $20 million. Therefore, when Jurassic Park first weekend box office results of more than $71 million, 3 days and midnight in the first week, were released, most of the American media, who had their jaws dropped, could only numbly exclaim, "Wow." At the same time, there was also news from the United Kingdom. Jurassic Park had been released in the United Kingdom for 3 days and had earned £11 million at the box office in the first 3 days. It had also broken the United Kingdom box office records. When the news came out, a large part of the media that was shouting that Jurassic Park could not get $1 billion at the box office, a large part of the media directly changed the direction of the news. On the weekday, Jurassic Park was still harvesting box office at a rate of more than $10 million on the same day in 3,000 theaters in North America. Without any suspense, after a full week, Jurassic Park earned $114 million in North America. At this point, Jurassic Park broke all the Hollywood box office records that could be broken. A record-breaking $3,000 in the first week. A record-breaking $59 million in midnight box office. A record-breaking $21 million in the first day box office. A record-breaking $71 million in the first weekend box office record. A record-breaking $114 million in the first week box office record. Moreover, when several overseas box office market data were sent back to China, not many people in Hollywood doubted that Jurassic Park would not only break the $790 million global box office record set by E.T., but also break the $1 billion mark. It was almost a certainty. Chapter 529. When the first-day box office figures of Jurassic Park were released, Eric and the crew were still in London. Originally, everyone was a little tired after crossing the Atlantic Ocean for 2 consecutive premieres, but when they heard about the record-breaking box office figures of Jurassic Park, the fatigue of the crew was swept away. Everyone knew what it meant to double the midnight record and achieve a first-day box office of $21 million, so everyone was very excited. That night, Eric booked a banquet hall at the Hyde Park Hotel where the crew was staying and invited everyone to party all night. Although the London premiere had ended, the movie would be released in other European countries in the following month. Small countries such as Belgium and Luxembourg did not even have a premiere. They only needed 1 or 2 actors to appear on some TV talk shows or interviews. However, Eric still had to make an appearance in France, Germany, Italy, and Spain, the major European countries. Therefore, after the London premiere, Eric did not leave and continued to stay in London. It had been more than 5 years since he woke up one morning in the summer of 1988 and found himself in this strange space and time. Eric had almost forgotten all about his original body. However, the British media obviously did not forget about him as the little boy from Walworth. Anyway, on the day Eric and his crew landed at Heathrow Airport, a London newspaper called him that. Walworth was a district in the southeast of London. Eric searched his memory but could barely piece together some winding streets and alleys. If he was really thrown in the so-called Walworth district, he would never be able to find his way around. However, the kind London tabloids published all the streets and alleys where his original body had lived for 8 years in the following days, and very sentimentally hoped that he would go back and take a look. Although the British were not as crazy as the Koreans who wanted to take the whole world for themselves, they always adhered to the proud insistence of, "What's mine is mine, and what's mine is still mine." Although he was a little disgruntled, Eric still gave the British a lot of face on occasions such as the premiere. In the face of the media's questions, he did not hesitate to reveal some beautiful words such as missing his hometown. After all, gaining the favor of this country would be a lot of benefits for the release of his movie in the future. After attending the premiere, the exciting box office in North America came back. The other main creators of the crew split up and went to other countries on the European continent to promote the movie. Eric did not immediately relax. He attended one party after another, and after a whole week, he finally had some free time. Although he still received a lot of party invitations, he could proudly decline most of them. Although Eric was not very fond of the British, he was still very interested in the city of London. So he asked the branch company to find a tour guide for him, and he walked through the corners of London. The tour guide was a native West End girl named Carolyn Wilson. She was said to be a descendant of nobility. Although she was young, she was very knowledgeable. She was even more professional than the professional tour guides when it came to the various illusions of any scenic spot in London. According to the branch company's manager, the girl was a top student at the University of Cambridge. She took the job only for the summer work-study program. However, the girl had a little pedantry unique to the British. Although the two were in an employer-employee relationship, the girl did not have the slightest awareness that the young man opposite her was her temporary boss. If she did not agree with some of Eric's views, she would immediately speak out, and before her words, she would add a proud, "I beg your pardon." It was kind of cute. Eric and the girl stood on the deck of a slowly moving yacht on the Thames River, looking at the scenery slowly passing by on both sides of the river. That's the Parliament House, also known as the Palace of Westminster. This building was rebuilt after the Great Fire in 1834. There were 2 design plans at the beginning. One was an ancient Roman-style domed building. The designer, Mr. William Kent, said that this architectural style represented harmony and order. The other plan was Sir Charles Barry's Gothic style. Because this architectural style is mysterious and majestic, it is more suitable for the Parliament House than the slightly religious ancient Roman architectural style, so in the end, this plan was chosen. Eric did not stand there with a serious expression like the girl beside him. Instead, he leaned casually on the railing, listening to the girl's skillful introduction. He smiled and said, "Carolyn, the views I heard seem to be different from what you said." In the middle of the 19th century, London became darker and more chaotic due to various factors. Those conservative aristocrats who had a bit of a literary aura felt that the dark and strange Gothic style was more suitable for the cultural environment of London at that time. Therefore, when the Parliament House was rebuilt, they chose the Gothic style. When Carolyn Wilson heard Eric's words, she was stunned. Then she took a deep breath and said, "I beg your pardon, Mr. Williams. I don't agree with your point of view. Although there is indeed such a saying, the Parliament House is such an important building. It definitely did not come from such a ridiculous choice. This is a very serious matter." Eric looked at the girl with a smile. After Carolyn Wilson finished speaking, she raised her head and stared into Eric's eyes. Her eyes were wide open, waiting for him to continue retorting. Eric was also planning to bicker with this delicate girl when the originally gloomy sky unknowingly started to drizzle. The overall rainfall in London was not very high. However, due to the special climate, the weather was gloomy most of the time. From time to time, there would be a drizzle. When the bodyguard who was hiding in the cabin saw that it was raining outside, he quickly brought an umbrella over. Eric took the umbrella and said, "Since it's raining, let's find a pier to dock. That's all for today." The bodyguard nodded and went back into the cabin. Eric held up the umbrella and sheltered the two of them under it. "Thank you, Mr. Williams," Carolyn said softly. She shrunk her neck a little shyly. In the blink of an eye she said, But I still can't agree with your point of view just now." "Okay, I admit defeat," Eric said immediately. Not far away on the river, when they saw Eric holding up the umbrella for the girl beside him, frequent flashlights immediately flashed on the small boat not far away. Since the moment Eric got off the plane, he had been surrounded by paparazzi 24/7. More than a week had passed, and he was used to these people. However, when he looked at the girl beside him, Eric suddenly asked, "Carolyn, have you read the newspapers recently?" The girl, who had always been serious, immediately blushed. However, she still nodded honestly. "Yes, Mr. Williams. However, I won't take those words seriously." "That's good." Eric did not want to talk about the gossip fabricated by the tabloids. He watched as the yacht slowly stopped at the pier in front of them. Then, Eric took Carolyn off the boat. A black Bentley business car was already parked at the side of the pier. "Carolyn, do you want me to send you back?" "Thank you, Mr. Williams. However, there's no need. I can take a taxi back. If it's possible, can you lend me an umbrella?" Eric looked at the drizzle that was getting heavier and heavier. He walked forward and personally opened the car door for the girl. "Let me send you back. There shouldn't be any taxis nearby. Don't refuse. Just treat it as an employee benefit." Carolyn Wilson hesitated for a moment. She knew that Eric lived in the Hyde Park Hotel. In fact, she also lived near Hyde Park. It was not too far away from Eric's residence. Moreover, it was not easy to find a taxi here. She thanked him again and carefully got into the car. Eric closed the door and sat on the other side. Then, he told the driver to start the car. "Where do you live?" Eric asked after the car started. "Knight Street," the girl replied. Eric nodded and gave the driver a few more instructions. The Bentley slowly made its way through the winding streets of London. The atmosphere in the car was quiet for a moment. Perhaps she felt that she had an obligation to liven up the atmosphere after hitching a ride. Carolyn Wilson quickly found a topic to talk about. "Mr. Williams, you've been touring London these days. Are you planning to shoot a movie related to London? This requires a suitable theme. However, if I really plan to shoot a movie related to London in the future, I will definitely ask you to be my consultant." How can I do that?" "I can't." Carolyn hurriedly shook her head. "However, I can introduce you to my mentor. He is a very knowledgeable person." Eric looked at the girl's serious appearance. He smiled and said, "I heard that you are a student at Cambridge?" "Yes, I studied English literature. I just graduated this year and have been admitted as a postgraduate student. After the summer break, I will continue to study." Eric nodded and said, "The female lead of my recent movie is a top student at Oxford. What about you? Are you interested in being an actress?" I'm not interested. I don't know how to act. Carolyn shook her head again. After thinking for a while, she suddenly said, however, I have a good friend who is very good at acting. She also studied literature. However, she established a drama club when she was in school. She is very good. Eric had just casually mentioned it. As for Carolyn's friend, he wasn't too interested. However, there was still some distance before they reached their destination. He casually said, very good? How good is she? Although Carolyn felt that Eric wasn't too interested in this topic, she still answered him out of courtesy that had been cultivated since childhood. She can personally write the script. Moreover, when she was in her second year, she used the script that she wrote to win the Edinburgh Festival Student Drama Award. After saying this, Carolyn suddenly thought of something and chuckled. What's wrong? Eric lowered his head and looked at the clothes in front of him. There didn't seem to be anything wrong. No, it's not that. I mean, the comedy that she won the award for was called Small Fortune. During the performance, she had to fall down a 7-foot ladder every time. Therefore, after she won the award, she tattooed a small ladder on her body. Eric was somewhat puzzled. There didn't seem to be anything funny about this. After thinking for a while, he suddenly asked, then where did she tattoo it? Carolyn's face immediately turned red. She bashfully rubbed against her seat for a while before saying, It's here. After saying that, the girl stretched out her finger and pointed at Eric's thigh. However, as if she had touched something terrifying, she immediately retracted her finger. Her face turned even redder. This time, Eric was interested in the friend that Carolyn had mentioned. He had never heard of someone who had a ladder tattooed on their buttocks. Your friend is quite interesting. Maybe if there's a chance, you can introduce her to me. Carolyn nodded her head. She wanted to say something, but in the end, she felt that it was too abrupt and didn't open her mouth. Half an hour later, the car stopped next to an apartment near Knight Street in the southern part of Hyde Park. At this time, the rain outside had stopped. Eric dropped the girl off at the side of the road. After saying goodbye, he got the driver to drive away. Carolyn watched as the Bentley disappeared around the corner. Just as she was about to turn around and enter the apartment, she heard the familiar roar of an engine from the other side of the street. Following which, a large displacement Jaguar Monarch from the 1970s appeared in her field of vision. The Jaguar stopped beside Carolyn. A girl with wavy hair and a bohemian-style dress jumped out from the driver's seat. Hey, Carolyn. What are you standing here for? It's nothing, Rachel. I just came back. Carolyn shook her head. Rachel looked at her face a few times and suddenly smiled. Was it that director who sent you back? Carolyn's face turned red. She wanted to deny it, but in the end, she still nodded her head lightly. The girl called Rachel gently pinched Carolyn's face and smiled. I really don't know what to do with you. It's been so many years, but you still can't lie. You're hopeless. I don't want to lie. Okay. Rachel helplessly shook her head. Suddenly, she mischievously asked, then, do you like that director? I'm not telling you. Carolyn's face immediately turned red. She subconsciously reached out to cover her face with her hands. However, Rachel pulled her into her embrace. Come, let this big sister hug you. Rachel wore small leather boots and was over 1.75 meters tall. However, the petite Carolyn was only 1.6 meters tall. Although she was hugged by this girl who was dressed in a rather unconventional way, they looked like a couple. Rachel, don't be like this. Carolyn pushed Rachel away and frantically walked into the apartment. Rachel blindly followed her and continued to tease her. I saw it in the newspaper. It said that you and that director are quite compatible. Don't talk nonsense. Carolyn took out her keys and opened the door. She avoided Rachel's gaze and awkwardly tried to change the topic. I even mentioned you to him. Chapter 530. Talking about me? What did he say? Did he secretly say something bad about me? Rachel asked casually as she walked into the apartment and sat beside the shoe rack at the entrance to change out of her long boots. Carolyn was wearing flat casual shoes and didn't change out of them like Rachel did. She walked straight to the sofa in the living room and sat down. When she heard Rachel's words, her face turned slightly red. She thought that it wasn't a bad thing to accidentally reveal that her good friend had a tattoo. She said, "Of course not. I only told him that you're great at acting in plays and that you even won an award at the Edinburgh Festival. He thinks that you're quite interesting and said that if there's a chance, I'll introduce you to him." Rachel took out a pair of slippers and put them on before walking over. She smiled and asked, "Then when do you plan to introduce me to him? He's a Hollywood tycoon. If I can get to know him, I won't have to run around all day to audition for small roles." Carolyn carefully looked at Rachel and stuttered, "But I think that Mr. Williams is just being polite. If he really brings you to him, it'll be too abrupt." Carolyn carefully looked at Rachel and stammered. Rachel looked at the girl's timid expression and leaned over to kiss Carolyn's cheek without hesitation. "All right, I'm just joking with you. I'm not that naive. Hollywood isn't a place for small fries like us. Actually, I don't really like that Eric Williams. Some time ago, an agent from ICM came to England to select a role for a movie by Firefly. My agent finally handed over my information with great difficulty. In the end, they just said that my age wasn't suitable and didn't even give me a chance to audition before they kicked me out. Just thinking about it makes me hateful. It's rumored that the selection criteria for actors were set by Eric Williams." Carolyn listened to Rachel's indignant tone and couldn't help but say, This shouldn't have anything to do with Mr. Williams. He's a very gentlemanly person. You're just too naive." Rachel couldn't help but shake her head. Carolyn pouted and said, "Of course not. I can tell what's real and what's fake." "All right, I believe you." Rachel quickly surrendered when she saw the girl's eyes widen. She looked like she was going to argue with her if she didn't believe her. Carolyn looked at Rachel's careless and insincere manner and did not continue speaking. It was clear that this was not the first time this had happened between the two of them. "So, Rachel, how did your audition go today?" "I'll get it on the spot," Rachel said excitedly. "It's a role in Inspector Moss. It's about 2 episodes. After I'm done with it, I'll be able to pay my rent for the next 2 months." Carolyn was a little excited for her good friend, but then she recalled the situation where she was freeloading at Rachel's place. Embarrassed, she said, "Rachel, I'll help you share a portion of the rent. Let's not talk about this anymore. You should keep it for your living expenses in the future. I don't need to worry about these things. Besides, you won't be staying here for long. Once school starts, you can go to Cambridge. You have to persevere. Don't give in to your father." Rachel waved her hand and said a few words before standing up. "I'll go make a pot of coffee. When it gets dark, we'll go out and eat together to celebrate getting another role." Carolyn nodded. She looked at Rachel's figure as she went into the kitchen and said with a little admiration, "I really envy you. You've always been so independent. If it wasn't for my father forcing me to give up my studies and marry that boorish and pretentious guy from the Edward family, I might not have had the courage to run away from home." Rachel, who was in the kitchen, heard Carolyn's words and laughed. "What's there to be envious about? At least when you get married, your father will definitely pay for the wedding expenses. My family might not be able to do so, so I can only save money and do it myself. I'm not sure either. I don't even know what I'll do in the future if I go against my father this time. I heard from Aunt Lisa that my aunt broke off from the family because she refused to listen to my grandfather's arrangements." Rachel walked out of the kitchen with a pot of coffee and said, "You have an aunt? I've never heard a chatterbox like you talk about this before." "I'm not a chatterbox," Carolyn immediately retorted in dissatisfaction. She realized that her rebuttal would not have any results, so she could only say, "I do have an aunt, but I've never seen her before. Aunt Lisa secretly told me about her. It said that when I was born, my aunt fell in love with a very talented playwright while watching a stage play in London's West End. However, that playwright was just a commoner and came from a very poor family. My grandfather firmly disagreed and quickly arranged another blind date for her. My aunt made a big fuss at home and then moved to Greece alone. She hasn't been back for 20 years. As Rachel listened, she could not help but laugh out loud. Carolyn, are you sure this is real? Did your Aunt Lisa make this up after watching too many plays about talented men and beautiful women? Aunt Lisa is just a servant in our family. How could she have the leisure to watch stage plays? Then she must have made it up from watching too many daytime soap operas. Rachel laughed again. Carolyn was clearly shaken by this fairy tale story. However, on the surface, she refused to admit defeat. She turned her head and said, "I'm ignoring you." Rachel laughed again and reached out to rub the girl's head. While the two were fooling around, the phone in the living room rang. Rachel put down the coffee and walked over to pick up the phone. After saying a few words, she covered the phone with her hand and said to the girl sitting on the sofa, "Carolyn, it's your father." Carolyn shrunk her neck. How did he know I was here? Rachel couldn't help but shake her head and sigh at her good friend's naivety. Although Carolyn's family wasn't considered illustrious in the UK, it definitely wasn't something that those declining aristocrats could compare to. Carolyn had escaped from her home, so how could her parents not care about her? On the day that the girl stayed at her place, Carolyn's mother had called her and asked her to take care of her daughter. Looking at Carolyn's worried appearance, Rachel said, "Do you want me to tell your father that you're not here?" Carolyn hesitated for a moment. She knew that since her father knew she was here, then she definitely wouldn't be able to escape. She could only reluctantly move over and take the phone from Rachel's hand. "Hello, Father. It's me." Rachel handed the phone to Carolyn. In order to not make her good friend feel too awkward, she consciously walked towards the bedroom. However, although Carolyn always spoke softly, Rachel could still faintly hear the girl's somewhat agitated voice. After 5 minutes, Rachel heard that there wasn't any movement outside. Only then did she walk out of the bedroom. Seeing Carolyn lying on the sofa with a sullen appearance, she asked, "Your father asked you to go back?" "No." Carolyn sat up again and said, "My father said that he won't force me to drop out of school anymore. However, he actually asked me to invite Mr. Williams to our house for a meal. This is really too abrupt. How could I say it out loud? If I get rejected, I'll die of embarrassment." Rachel looked at the girl's conflicted appearance as she kicked her legs. She could easily understand the ins and outs of the matter. The day after Carolyn appeared in front of Eric Williams, the resourceful UK media thoroughly investigated the girl's background. The Wilson family's beloved daughter was personally acting as a tour guide. Under other circumstances, even if it wasn't considered a family scandal, the Wilson family would definitely regard it as an extremely disgraceful action and stop it. However, after so many days, the Wilson family didn't take any action. They also didn't respond to the media's comments that Carolyn and Eric Williams were extremely compatible. Clearly, they were happy to see this happen. If Eric was just a slightly famous Hollywood director, the Wilson family might still be able to maintain their status. However, a young tycoon with billions of dollars in assets was enough for the Wilson family to put down their reservations. Looking at her friend's conflicted appearance, Rachel asked, "Then what do you plan to do?" I don't know." Carolyn shook her head. Rachel was very familiar with this good friend of hers. Looking at Carolyn's appearance, she knew that the girl also seemed to want to invite Eric Williams to her house as a guest. Therefore, she encouraged her, "Then you can directly tell him tomorrow. In any case, this is an invitation from your father. If he rejects it, it has nothing to do with you. You don't have to feel embarrassed." "Really?" Carolyn raised her head and looked at Rachel hopefully. Rachel didn't hesitate at all and nodded firmly, "Of course. Then tomorrow I'll tell him that my father invited him." Carolyn's face was red. "Rachel, help me think about how I should say it tomorrow so that it won't seem too abrupt." Because it was located in a high-latitude area, the days in June in London were very long. It was already 7 o'clock in the afternoon when Eric returned to the hotel. However, the sky didn't show any signs of turning dark. After eating dinner in advance, Eric returned to his room and began to deal with the emails that had accumulated for the day. The box office of the second week of Jurassic Park was released. Because of the explosion in the first week's box office, although the movie's reputation was very good, most organizations still predicted that the box office of Jurassic Park would drop by more than 40% in the second week. Even many people in Firefly held a similar view. Some people even suggested that Eric prepare to reduce the number of screens of Jurassic Park in advance. However, after the real data was released, many people's predictions were once again disappointed. The box office of Jurassic Park in the second week only dropped 37% compared to the first week, earning more than $42 million. The drop was far lower than the average 50% expected by most box office forecasting organizations. In the process of large-scale release, many Hollywood movies would experience a relatively large drop in the box office in the second week because of the explosion in the box office in the first week. The subsequent drop in the box office would stabilize at a data that was in line with the movie's quality and reputation. Since Jurassic Park avoided the drop in the box office in the second week, the drop in the box office in the next few weeks would definitely not be too high. The Internal Statistics Department of Firefly had already estimated that the box office of Jurassic Park in North America would be $500 million, which was $40 million higher than the first Star Wars. Eric originally said that the box office of Jurassic Park in North America would be about $400 million. Although the box office performance of Jurassic Park in North America exceeded his expectations, he was not sure if the movie could reach the threshold of $500 million in North America. Because when Eric planned the North American release strategy of Jurassic Park, he used a high-intensity publicity and large-scale distribution strategy that only became popular in Hollywood a few years later. This distribution method was an evolution of the saturated distribution that was currently popular in Hollywood. It was more radical than the traditional saturated distribution, but it also had a lot of disadvantages. The most important thing was that it greatly shortened the release cycle of the movie. A traditional commercial blockbuster often earned more than 80% of the box office within 4 weeks of release. According to the current box office trend of Jurassic Park, Eric was confident that Jurassic Park would earn $300 million in North America in 4 weeks. However, Eric had no idea what would happen to the box office of Jurassic Park a month later. After reading the email related to Jurassic Park, Eric began to check other emails and soon found the information he wanted, which was Arnold Schwarzenegger's Last Action Hero. As Eric had expected, due to the poor quality and the box office squeeze of Jurassic Park, the action film that Carlock Pictures had spent $80 million on only earned more than $16 million in the first weekend. It was not even as much as the first-day box office of Jurassic Park. In the original space-time, Stallone and Schwarzenegger were both hit by these two blockbusters that were released consecutively. These two famous Hollywood action movie stars could be said to have shared the same fate. They were both born in the 1940s and were both late bloomers in their 30s. More than 10 years after they became famous, they both fell in 2 movies that were released in the same summer. Although Arnold Schwarzenegger received more than $20 million for several sequels to the Terminator series after Last Action Hero, he no longer had the confidence to ask for a high price for his other movies. Stallone's 2 popular series Rambo and Rocky ended because of the declining box office, and there was no trump card to maintain his value. In the next 10 years in the original space-time, Stallone's works were barely good, and only The Expendables was completed after many years of bumpy production. Chapter 531. As early as last year, when Firefly acquired Disney, they had already publicized the True Lies project. The media had also been paying attention to the progress of this matter. As the True Lies project began to prepare, the media also paid attention to the male lead that had been missing for this project. Hollywood stars such as Mel Gibson, Harrison Ford, and Nicolas Cage were rumored to be candidates for the male lead. However, many people in the industry knew that Firefly was eyeing Arnold Schwarzenegger for the male lead. Arnold Schwarzenegger was, of course, aware of this matter. Both sides had a brief contact at the beginning of the year. At that time, Arnold Schwarzenegger's net worth was $15 million, and the other party had no intention of backing down. After that, the two sides temporarily stalled. Schwarzenegger was not in a hurry because his previous movies had done well at the box office. Arnold did not consider that Last Action Hero would fail miserably at that time. However, the other party obviously knew the value of the movie that Eric had personally selected, so they did not reject it. It seemed that they were just waiting for Firefly to take the initiative to compromise. After all, Firefly had compromised once during the box office negotiations for Terminator 2. Arnold was not in a hurry, and Firefly was of course not in a hurry either. No one knew the box office prospects of Last Action Hero better than Eric. Now that the box office of Last Action Hero was released, Eric could not even imagine how Schwarzenegger was feeling right now. Just as he was about to reply to an email to Firefly's production department and ask them to wait for another week before restarting the salary negotiations with Arnold, the phone in the room rang. Eric picked up the phone, and a familiar voice suddenly came through the receiver. "Hi, Eric, this is Jim." Eric responded with a smile. He could almost guess the purpose of Cameron's call. The two sides talked about Jurassic Park for a while, and then talked about Cameron's preparation for True Lies for a while. Cameron then talked about the purpose of his call. "Eric, you must know about the box office of Last Action Hero, right?" "Yes, more than $16 million in the first weekend. This figure is indeed a bit miserable. After the failure of 2 blockbusters in a row, I think the Germans will definitely calm down for a year or two and will not easily throw money into Hollywood. As for MGM, I think Frank Marcoso and John Carrier will probably be replaced by Credit Lyonnais before they can warm up to their positions. Maybe MGM will enter the auction process again." Hearing that Eric was going to continue blabbering, Cameron had to fake 2 coughs and interrupted Eric. "Eric, we can talk about these things when we have time. I'm talking about the male lead of True Lies. You said that you wanted Arnold to play the role." Eric still had a smile on his face, but his tone was full of difficulty. "Jim, you were also there when we talked. You know that I was not very optimistic about the project of Last Action Hero. At that time, Arnold's salary was too high, so I wanted to wait for the movie to be released before discussing the salary with Arnold. However, I did not expect that a movie with more than $80 million would only have a box office of $16 million in the first weekend. Jurassic Park's production cost was only $75 million. According to this trend, the final box office of Last Action Hero is estimated to only be about $50 million. If this movie was only a small failure, I would not worry too much. However, Arnold fell too hard this time. In this case, his next movie will definitely be seen as a failure by Hollywood. The risk is too high." After hearing Eric's words, Cameron immediately said, "Eric, don't talk nonsense with me. Don't think that I don't know you. You must be laughing evilly right now. Arnold couldn't reach you, so he called me. $3 million. It's up to you whether you want to use it or not. Don't try to cheat me." Compared to Arnold's previous net worth of $15 million, $3 million was like a drop in the ocean. However, if it was Eric's turn, he would probably do the same. Hollywood was very cruel. The total cost of the production and distribution of Last Action Hero was more than $100 million. Based on the current situation, the parties involved in the investment and distribution could only recover about $50 million. Although it was not as tragic as the failure of Throat Island 2 years ago, this level of loss was enough to knock a Hollywood superstar into the dust. In the original space-time, Kevin Costner was unable to recover from the setback of future Waterworld. He went from being a popular box office superstar in Hollywood to finally being reduced to playing the role of Superman's dad. Therefore, for the current Arnold, a bargain at a bargain price would give him a chance to make a comeback and squeeze into the ranks of A-list superstars again. This was very cost-effective. If he did not seize this opportunity, it was estimated that no one would ask him to act in a movie for the next 1 or 2 years. Eric was thinking about it when Cameron's urging voice came from the other side of the phone again. Eric could only say, "Yes, of course I'll use it. Jim, this time I'll give you face. $3 million it is." "Don't, I'm just a messenger." "You don't have to give me face." Okay, Jim. But Firefly is my personal property. It's not like the rich German conglomerates. Spending 10 or 20 million more is like pulling out a strand of hair, so you have to take it easy this time. Cameron immediately laughed heartily. Of course, that's not a problem. Eric, you still don't know me. I'll spend every penny on the movie. Eric cursed in his heart. It was because he knew him too well. The two unscrupulous guys did not give in to each other and talked for a while before hanging up. Eric was about to return to his desk to continue reading the email when the phone that he had just put down rang again. Although it was already night time in London, it was still afternoon work in Los Angeles. Eric was not surprised and picked up the phone again. This time, it was Stan Winston who called. His tone was anxious. Eric listened to Stan Winston's words and frowned. He said, "Stan, send me a copy of the information. I'll take a look first. If necessary, I'll rush back tomorrow morning as soon as possible." The person on the other end of the line said something else before Eric hung up. This time, the phone did not ring again. Half an hour later, Eric received an email from the Digital Domain. After reading for a while, Eric's eyebrows furrowed again. There was another wave of resignations in the Digital Domain. The last time was when Tornado was released last year. Because of the huge box office prospects of special effects movies, several major Hollywood film companies began to increase their investment in special effects and set up their own special effects departments. At the same time, because of market demand, many small special effects companies also emerged in Hollywood. It was more appropriate to call them special effects studios. However, because Hollywood still underestimated the commercial prospects of special effects movies last year, they did not spend too much to poach talent from the Digital Domain. The Digital Domain was not affected much. But this year was different. The record-breaking box office of Jurassic Park in the first week greatly stimulated the other major Hollywood film companies. In order to catch up with this development trend, this time, the Digital Domain could only be described as unscrupulous in their efforts to poach talent. Not only were there computer special effects artists in the Digital Domain, but even the software research team led by Ed Kamal was greatly affected. In the week that Eric left Los Angeles, the Digital Domain received more than 120 resignation applications. At first, Stan Winston thought it was a repeat of last year's situation and did not take it to heart. He dealt with it according to his experience from last year. But in the past 2 days, more and more resignation applications were received. Stan Winston could no longer stay calm. After reading the letter, Eric's anxious mood calmed down a little. He first called his assistant to arrange a flight for him tomorrow morning. Then, he silently thought about how to deal with this crisis. Obviously, with the increasing proportion of special effects movies in Hollywood, it was conceivable that with the scale of the Digital Domain, even if it were to double, it would be impossible to cover all of Firefly's special effects projects, let alone Hollywood's broader special effects movie market. Since he could not stop the expansion of the special effects industry, he could only choose the plan that was most beneficial to him. And Eric had considered this plan when he first established the Digital Domain. He just did not expect that the original plan would be implemented more than 3 years earlier than he originally expected. The night passed unknowingly as he pondered over the details of these matters. When Eric came back to his senses, it was already bright outside the window. Looking at the time, it was only 5:00 in the morning. Anyway, there was enough time to rest on the plane, so Eric had no intention of catching up on sleep. After washing up, he walked out of the hotel room alone and went to the restaurant to have breakfast. Because the plane would not leave until 8:00 in London, there was nothing to do for the time being. Eric opened today's newspaper. Hollywood's young tycoon falls in love with British aristocrat's daughter, both intimately tour the Thames River. On the News of the World, a clear photo was published on the front page. The photo was taken yesterday afternoon when Eric was holding the umbrella for Carolyn. The paparazzi took the photo quite cleverly. It happened to be the moment when the two of them looked at each other. Eric could vaguely remember that at that time, Carolyn should have been thanking him. However, the newspaper described this situation as two people looking at each other affectionately. Eric smiled helplessly. He suddenly remembered that the News of the World was also a newspaper under the News Corporation. Moreover, it was the fuse of the famous eavesdropping scandal in the original Spacetime. Putting this matter aside, Eric thought of another matter. He had originally made an appointment with Carolyn to continue touring London today. Now, he definitely could not continue. Eric originally wanted to let the staff of the branch company explain to the girl afterwards. However, there was nothing to do at the moment. Moreover, Carolyn's place was not too far away. Eric decided to make a trip there personally. After calling the hotel lobby manager and asking for a car, Eric instructed the driver to drive to Carolyn's place. A few minutes later, the car stopped in front of the apartment where Carolyn's film crew was staying. Eric had just gotten out of the car when he felt a flash of light nearby. Looking over in surprise, he discovered that there were paparazzi guarding the place. Eric was about to ignore them and walk into the apartment, but then he remembered that he did not know which floor Carolyn lived on. When Eric saw the paparazzi peeking their heads out, he walked over to them. When the paparazzi saw Eric walking towards him, he did not show any signs of panic. Instead, he smiled and greeted Eric. "Mr. Williams, you came to pick up Miss Wilson so early in the morning?" Eric did not answer. Instead he asked, "Which newspaper are you from?" "The News of the World." The paparazzi did not hide anything and added, "But if there is any breaking news, of course, it will be sold to the highest bidder." Eric smiled and asked, "Do you know which room Carolyn is staying in?" "Room 203 on the second floor," the paparazzi blurted out without hesitation. Eric thanked him and turned to walk back to the apartment. The moment Eric entered the door, he heard a few soft clicking sounds. Because it was still early, Eric walked up the old stairs to the second floor without bumping into anyone. When he arrived at the door of room 203, Eric gently knocked on the door. There was no response. After knocking a few more times, a somewhat languid female voice sounded, "It's not even 7 o'clock yet. Who is it?" When Eric heard that the girl's voice was not Carolyn's, he was a little surprised. However, he still said, "Hello, miss. I'm Eric Williams. I'm looking for Miss Wilson. Can you open the door?" A somewhat surprised cry came from the door. Eric guessed that the other party was observing him through the peephole, so he did not hide. Then, the door was pulled open. A girl in light blue pajamas appeared in front of him. When Eric saw the girl's appearance, a look of surprise appeared on his face. The world was so small. "Hi. Hello. Mr. Williams. Please come in." The girl did not notice the surprise on Eric's face. She was a little flustered as she led him into the room and said, "Mr. Williams, please sit down. I'll go and wake Carolyn up. She hasn't woken up yet." "Thank you." Eric nodded and sat down on the sofa. Then, "I still don't know your name." My name is Rachel Wasey." "Mr. Williams, you can call me Rachel." Eric smiled as he looked at the girl's somewhat flustered appearance. He nodded and said, "Hello, Rachel. You can also call me Eric." "That, of course, yes," Rachel said and smiled foolishly at Eric. She opened the door of a bedroom and went in. Chapter 532. Eric sat on the sofa in the living room. He first heard a soft cry from the bedroom, followed by a series of rustling sounds and whispers. After 10 minutes, the two girls neatly dressed and walked out of the bedroom, greeting Eric somewhat reservedly. Rachel was half a head taller than Carolyn, so Eric could easily tell that they were wearing different clothes. Seeing the two girls sit down on the sofa opposite him, he asked with some doubt, "You two are staying in the same bedroom?" "Yes, Mr. Williams." Carolyn nodded without any hesitation. Perhaps it was because she had just woken up, but the girl's slightly flushed face had a bit of a flirtatious look. Rachel was much more quick-witted than Carolyn, immediately adding, "Carolyn is only temporarily staying here with me. We are not, living together." Carolyn felt that Rachel's words were somewhat inexplicable. Her long eyelashes fluttered a few times before she understood. Her fair face immediately flushed red, and she stood up in a panic, wanting to run away. "Mr. Williams, I'll go get you a glass of water." Eric originally wanted to say no, but the girl's figure had already floated into the kitchen. Only Eric and Rachel were left in the living room. Eric looked around the exquisite little apartment with interest, then his gaze landed on the somewhat reserved Rachel Wasey. Regardless of whether it was his memories from his previous life or Carolyn's words yesterday, Eric knew that Rachel Wasey was definitely not an introverted girl. However, due to his current identity, as long as the majority of people had a normal EQ, they would not be able to unreservedly reveal their true nature in front of him. From a certain point of view, this was also a kind of pity. Carolyn said that you are an actress? Rachel's gaze had originally followed Eric, secretly looking around to see if there was anything inappropriate about her apartment. When she suddenly heard Eric's words, she hurriedly nodded. Yes, Mr. A. Mr. Williams, I've been going through auditions most of the time recently. I've already obtained a small role in the 6th season of Inspector Moss. Just as Eric was about to speak, Carolyn walked out of the kitchen with a cup of steaming hot water. Eric took the glass and saw that there was still a piece of ice at the bottom of the glass that had not completely melted. He politely took a few sips before putting the glass on the coffee table in front of him. Seeing Eric put down the glass of water, Carolyn asked, Mr. Williams, why are you here so early? Is there something you need? Although the girl was a little naive, she was definitely not a fool. Eric must have come to find her so early in the morning for something else. I'm going back to Los Angeles. I happen to have some time, so I came over to say goodbye. When Carolyn heard Eric's words, a trace of unconcealable sadness appeared on her face. However, she still politely replied, In that case, Mr. Williams, I wish you a pleasant journey. Eric was stunned for a moment before he smiled and said, Thank you. Rachel, who was sitting beside Carolyn, resisted the urge to cover her forehead with great difficulty. This little fool, what nonsense is she talking about? Seeing that Carolyn didn't know what to say next, Rachel could only open her mouth and ask, Mr. Williams, will you still come to London? I might not come back in the short term. Originally, the German premiere of Jurassic Park was scheduled for the 4th of July. I could have stayed there until that date. However, something happened in Los Angeles, so I had to personally rush back to deal with it. If I come to Europe again, I might directly stay in Paris or Berlin. When Rachel heard Eric's words, the disappointment on Carolyn's body could even overflow. She looked at her good friend with some pity and suddenly mustered up the courage to say, Mr. Williams, Carolyn will only report to Cambridge in September. If you go to Paris or London, Carolyn can still be your tour guide. She has no problem speaking French, German, or Spanish. Seeing the originally depressed girl suddenly raise her head and look at him with hope, Eric didn't have the heart to refuse. He nodded and said, That's good. When the time comes, I'll get someone to give you a call. Carolyn, are you willing? I have no problem. Carolyn nodded a few times like a chick pecking at rice. Then, she realized that her actions were too unreserved. She lowered her head with a red face. Carolyn's salary would be handled by the people at the Firefly branch. After Eric finished with this matter, he stood up and said, In that case, I'll take my leave. The plane leaves at 8 o'clock. I have to go back and pack my luggage. The two girls stood up together with Eric. After he finished speaking, Eric looked at Rachel Wasey. He took out his personal business card from his pocket and handed it over. Under Rachel's somewhat surprised gaze, he explained, There's a disaster romance movie in the Firefly project. They need a British female lead with a rebellious and elegant temperament. I think you can give it a try. Rachel subconsciously took the business card. When she heard Eric's first few sentences, she felt that happiness had come too suddenly. Her head was buzzing, and she didn't hear a single word that Eric said after that. Although she was born in a wealthy family and could leisurely study literature at the University of Cambridge like those aristocratic children, being an actress was just a hobby and a way to make a living. However, this didn't mean that Rachel would be indifferent to the invitation from the broader stage of Hollywood. It was just that because of her inner pride and restraint, Rachel wasn't like many people who would use unscrupulous means to curry favor with Hollywood. Otherwise, when she found out that Carolyn had gotten the job as Eric's personal tour guide, she would have thought of ways to get close to her. Eric said something and left after saying goodbye to Rachel, who was still in a daze. Carolyn wanted to send Eric all the way downstairs, but Eric thought of the paparazzi downstairs and rejected her. The girl watched as Eric's figure disappeared down the stairs. Then, she turned around and closed the door. She took a few deep breaths to calm her emotions before walking up to Rachel. "Hey, Rachel." Seeing that her friend didn't answer, Carolyn playfully reached out her small hand and snatched the business card from Rachel's hand. "Hey, it's mine." Rachel immediately reacted. Carolyn threw herself on the sofa and hid the business card. She spread out her hands and said, "It's gone. Hurry up and get up. If you lose it, I'll chase you out to sleep on the streets." Rachel lifted Carolyn to the side and found the business card under the pillow. She went into the bedroom and put it away. Then, she walked out and jumped in front of Carolyn. She held the girl's small face and rubbed it. "Ha ha ha, Carolyn, I'm going to Hollywood." "Hollywood?" Carolyn shook her head in dissatisfaction. "Hey, you must have been distracted just now. You didn't hear what Mr. Williams said." "Oh, that's right. What else did he say?" "He said that the movie will only start filming in about 2 years. He also hopes that you won't be too eager for quick success in the next 2 years. Instead, you should take part in more stage performances and continue to hone your acting skills." Carolyn's face was filled with schadenfreude. 2 years. Who knows, he might have forgotten about it by then. Rachel was a little confused when she heard this condition. 2 years wasn't a long time, but it wasn't short either. Since the movie was decided by Firefly 2 years in advance, it definitely wouldn't be a small matter. If she was 100% sure that she could get the role, Rachel didn't mind waiting for 2 years. However, what Eric had just said was only a verbal agreement. Although Rachel didn't think that Eric would make fun of a nobody like her, if he really forgot about it 2 years later, she could only blame herself for being unlucky. Feeling hesitant, Rachel decided to call her agent and ask for an idea. Carolyn watched as Rachel picked up the phone and called her agent. After the other party muttered a lot over the phone and hung up, the girl regretfully patted the pillow in front of her a few times. "Eric left. I can't invite him on behalf of my father." At this moment, Carolyn was simply a lucky mascot in Rachel's eyes. After putting down the phone, Rachel immediately rushed over and hugged the girl. "Don't worry. Didn't he just say that he'll look for you when he comes to Europe? You can invite him again when the time comes. But, although I know a little about Paris, I've only been to Berlin twice." Anyway, you're a little genius with a photographic memory. You'll know everything after going to the library for a day. If you really can't do it, I can accompany you to Berlin to explore first. Then it's settled. We'll go to Berlin tomorrow. Even if you want to throw yourself at him, you don't have to be in such a hurry. I still have an audition tomorrow. I'll accompany you on the weekend." After getting off the plane from Los Angeles International Airport, Eric went straight to Firefly Studios. Michael Lynn, Jeffrey Katzenberg, Jeffrey Hansen, Frank Wales, and Stan Winston, Ed Kamal, John Lasseter, who were in charge of the digital domain and Pixar, were all gathered at Firefly Studios. In addition, some of the heads of the other departments of Firefly were also there. Eric walked into the conference room and sat down in the empty seat prepared for him. He said to Stan Winston, who was on his left, "Stan, reintroduce the current situation." Stan Winston nodded. His assistant secretary distributed the prepared documents to everyone present. He said, "This incident probably started after the box office of Jurassic Park was released on the first weekend. Because of what happened after Tornado was released last year, I didn't take it to heart. However, we've been receiving more and more resignation letters these days. When I sent you the email, we only received 126 resignation letters. In just one day, it increased to 169. Currently, I'm holding back most of them and haven't signed them immediately. Before this incident, the fixed number of employees in the digital domain was 850. Of course, this number doesn't include the technical support team led by Ed. However, if things continue to develop, we may lose more than 30% of our employees." Chapter 533. Eric tapped the table lightly and thought for a moment, then asked, "Among these people, what's the ratio of model special effects artists to CG special effects artists?" Stan Winston paused and said, "Well, I haven't gotten anyone to calculate that yet." "Then do it immediately," Eric said. He watched as Stan Winston turned his head to instruct his assistant to do it immediately. Then, he looked at Ed Carmel and asked, "What about you guys?" Ed Moore said, "My situation here is still okay. Our opponents are not too interested in the ordinary programmers of the team. They are mainly in contact with the mid-level and senior project managers of the team. Although some of them have signed a non-compete agreement, and if they are forced to leave, they will not be able to engage in related work for a year. However, I think the commercial prospects of Jurassic Park are enough for our opponents to challenge the legal risks." After hearing this, Eric looked at John Lasseter. John Lasseter shrugged and said, "I think everyone here has already seen the Bug Crisis movie. This 3D animated movie is not inferior to Toy Story 2 years ago. So, I think, with the previous experience in the digital field, Pixar should take some precautionary measures to prevent a large number of employees from leaving." After the three of them finished talking, Eric looked at the executives present and asked, "Is there anything else to add?" Michael Lynn said, "Eric, Ryder collected some information. Let him speak." Eric nodded to a slightly plump Caucasian man in his 40s. The man said, "Mr. Williams, according to some of the information we collected, a week ago, Michael Eisner of Universal Pictures, George Lucas of Lucasfilm, and Carol Bartz, the chairman and CEO of the famous graphics software company Autodesk, had a meeting in San Rafael, where Autodesk's headquarters is located. Then, Autodesk announced that it would cooperate with Industrial Light and Magic and Universal Pictures to enter the film and television special effects software market. However, the announcement did not mention any specific details. In addition, several medium-sized special effects companies in Hollywood have recently received a large amount of funding and are recruiting." After the executive named Ryder finished speaking, the assistant who had just received Stan Winston's order pushed the door open and walked into the conference room again. He placed a set of sorted data in front of Stan Winston. "Eric, the statistics are out. Among the 169 people who submitted their resignation applications, 112 of them are model special effects artists, and 57 of them are CG special effects artists." When he reported the data, Stan Winston breathed a sigh of relief. Although he started by making model special effects, Stan was definitely not a conservative person. He had heard Eric say more than once that CG special effects were the mainstream special effects trend in Hollywood in the future. The success of CG special effects films such as Terminator 2, Tornado, and Jurassic Park proved this point. Among the employees who resigned, close to 2/3 of them were model special effects artists, and only 1/3 were CG special effects artists. In this case, things were not as bad as he thought. Everyone in the room seemed to be relieved. Eric had already guessed this possibility. Now that his guess was confirmed, the last trace of worry in his heart dissipated a lot. The reason why CG special effects artists in the digital domain did not leave in large numbers was mainly because CG special effects artists used a combination of special effects software developed by the digital domain. Currently, this software was not sold in the digital domain. Without the tools and software of the digital domain, these skilled CG special effects artists could only relearn the immature third-rate special effects software on the market. If it were not for the hard-to-refuse salary offered by the poaching company, these people would never take the risk to leave. After sorting out the ideas that he had conceived in London and on the plane yesterday, Eric clapped his hands to get everyone's attention. He said, "Okay, now let's talk about how to solve this problem. First of all, we considered cooperating with Autodesk to develop Maya, but that cooperation did not succeed. Since they were unwilling to join us, now that Autodesk has set their sights on the special effects software, it's too late for them to join us. We'll kick them out the same way they jumped in." There were a few chuckles in the conference room, but no one looked down on Autodesk. Autodesk relied on the AutoCAD industrial design software series and had basically monopolized the industrial graphics software market. Film and television special effects software and industrial graphics software had many similarities. If Autodesk wanted to develop the corresponding film and television special effects software, it would not be too difficult. The cycle was also much shorter than the development of Maya and other tools and software in the digital domain. In the original spacetime, because of the opportunity to enter the market early, Autodesk also monopolized the film and television special effects software. At this time, if they wanted to stop Autodesk from entering the film and television special effects software industry, it was not only for the sake of the software sales interests, but more importantly, it was to ensure the digital domain's position in the film and television special effects industry. If any company only invested and did not generate profits, sooner or later, they would not be able to escape the road of closure. The technical team led by Ed Kamal was in such a situation. Under the rapid development of the digital domain, there were no disadvantages. Once the film and television special effects company entered the era of mass murder, this huge technical team that could not make profits would become a burden to the company. After Eric finished speaking, everyone in the conference room began to put forward their own suggestions. After 3 days of intensive meetings, the digital domain held a press conference at the Firefly headquarters. At this time, the box office data for the second week of Jurassic Park was released. The box office received more than $71 million, and the total box office reached $185 million. Although it was a digital domain press conference, when they learned that Eric would be attending this press conference, many of the invited reporters prepared a lot of Jurassic Park sequels. However, the information revealed at this press conference did not disappoint the reporters present. Ed Kamal, who was originally Pixar's CTO, announced to the public that Firefly would integrate the technical support teams of Pixar and the digital domain to form a separate company, Firefly Software. Firefly Software's main purpose was to provide special effects software and related film and television special effects solutions to target customers. After Ed Kamal finished speaking, more than 100 reporters in the conference room immediately began to discuss. Some of the reporters who were not well informed couldn't understand why the digital domain would do such a self-destructive move when it was at its peak. Other reporters who were very sensitive to industry news realized that this was Firefly's counterattack against the poaching of the digital domain. At first, it didn't sound logical, but even if the news of Autodesk's cooperation with Industrial Light and Magic and Universal was not revealed, some smart people could understand that this was actually a disguised expansion of the digital domain. Although the digital domain special effects software had not yet been leaked, the technical level demonstrated in movies like Jurassic Park was miles ahead of the small and medium Hollywood special effects companies. Therefore, once the digital domain software tools were sold, not only would the digital domain special effects artists be given priority, but other special effects companies would also join the digital domain's software tool user camp. Moreover, Ed Kamal's speech had a very important point. Aside from the special effects software, Firefly Software would also provide special effects solutions for their clients. This measure not only increased Firefly Software's profitability, it also indirectly restricted the development of the special effects companies that were greedy for convenience through the licensing of their solutions. After all, if they could buy a set of special effects production plans at a lower price, most people wouldn't waste time and money on research and development. Firefly Software solutions would definitely rely on Firefly's own software, which once again restricted the use of other special effects software. After Ed Kamal's announcement, the conference entered a free Q&A session. Below the stage, a large number of hands raised in unison. The host looked below the stage and casually picked a female reporter with a very good temperament. Unexpectedly, when the female reporter received the microphone, she immediately turned to Eric, who hadn't spoken before. "Mr. Williams, I'm a reporter from the Los Angeles Times. The North American box office for Jurassic Park has amassed a total of $185 million. Movie fans are very interested in the follow-up story of Jurassic Park, but your original novel didn't reveal any relevant information. May I ask if Firefly will develop a sequel? First, I want to say, this lady, your question has nothing to do with this conference. If anyone else asks similar questions, I won't answer. However, I can tell you now that there will definitely be a sequel." Eric was just about to hand the microphone over when the female reporter immediately asked, "Then, Mr. Williams, will Firefly Software treat special effects companies outside of the digital domain differently?" "I don't know what kind of difference you're talking about. Firefly Software and the digital domain are originally one entity. If it's about technical support, Firefly software will definitely spare no effort in the digital domain. This is an indisputable fact. However, in other aspects, for example, Firefly software's special effects software is treated equally internally and externally. After the separation, even if the digital domain wants to use Firefly software's latest software, they will still have to pay according to the process. The microphone was quickly passed to another reporter, and the other person's question was still directed at Eric. Mr. Williams, I'm a reporter from the San Francisco Chronicle. May I ask if Firefly software will be listed? Currently, there's no listing plan, but there will definitely be one in the future. The reporter immediately seized the opportunity and asked a question that everyone on Wall Street was very concerned about. Then, will Firefly Pictures be listed? Chapter 534. Eric raised his eyebrows slightly and did not answer. Instead, he asked, "What do you think is the purpose of a company going public?" To raise funds so that the company can develop better. So, Firefly is not short of funds now, and its development is obvious to all. So, do you think it is necessary for Firefly to go public? The reporter was not discouraged and immediately asked, "Mr. Williams, are you satisfied with the status quo and do not intend to continue to expand Firefly Pictures?" Of course not, but if you want to expand Firefly Pictures territory, there are many ways to obtain funds, and it is not necessary to go public. I have my own complete plan for the development of Firefly, and some development ideas may even cause a lot of controversy. I don't want to waste my time explaining to those old men on Wall Street every time I make a decision after going public. Everyone is in the news industry, and you should know very well how difficult it is to deal with those people. Well, let's end this question here. Let's return to the theme of today's press conference. Listening to Eric's slightly teasing tone, the reporters present chuckled. They all knew the meaning of Eric's words. Although the relationship between Hollywood and Wall Street was quite close, in fact, the game between the two sides was more than cooperation. Wall Street pursued a company's high growth rate and high return on various operating indicators. Most investors often did not value long-term development, and only wanted to see beautiful financial reports. The element of speculation was very large. The operators of companies often valued long-term development more, and many times, they would sacrifice short-term interests for this purpose, which formed a difference with Wall Street's concept. If a company did not go public, Wall Street, of course, would be like a dog biting a hedgehog. I don't want your funds, and you can't meddle in my territory. If you chose to go public, even if the control was still in the hands of the business operator, as long as the company's development footprint deviated from the track envisaged by Wall Street, it would still be constantly criticized by Wall Street investors. Today, the investment bank published a bearish article. Tomorrow, the Wall Street tycoon would fiercely criticize it. In the face of the resulting fluctuation in the stock price, if a company did not compromise, it would not be peaceful. The most extreme example was, of course, the Marvel Entertainment Group that Eric had been quietly following. In the 1980s, Marvel Comics had been doing very well and had even almost swallowed up Warner's DC Comics. But since the comic company fell into the hands of Wall Street investor Ron Perlman at the end of the 1980s, it ushered in a life full of disasters. Ron Perlman was only interested in capital operations and had no intention of running the company. Until now, Ron Perlman had extracted hundreds of millions of dollars of profit from Surprise Entertainment, but Surprise Entertainment's operating condition had been declining, almost to the point of bankruptcy. There were countless speculators like Ron Perlman on Wall Street. In some of Eric's memories from his previous life, MGM Pictures finally got rid of the casino tycoon Kirk Cochran in 2005, but not long after, it became a toy in the hands of another Wall Street speculator, Carl Icahn. In the following years, MGM repeatedly faced bankruptcy crises, and its operating condition did not improve at all, but Carl Icahn made a lot of money. All this information made Eric have a deep fear of Wall Street. Firefly Pictures was the foundation of Eric's career and the career he was most passionate about, so Eric had never planned to let Firefly Pictures go public. Some of the high-tech companies that Chris helped him manage were the capital that Eric prepared to expand his territory in Hollywood. No one knew the development prospects of Cisco, AOL, Yahoo, and other companies better than Eric. If Firefly Pictures needed a large amount of funds to expand in the future, Eric could sell the shares of Cisco and other companies or get Yahoo and other companies listed to obtain a large amount of development funds. Moreover, even if he lost control of these companies in the future, Eric did not care too much. As a rising industry, the internet was very much a bubble. Cashing out in time was the wisest choice, and there were still countless investment opportunities in the internet in the next 20 years. After Eric said these words, he directly handed the microphone to Ed Kamal on the other side. After Eric's reminder, the reporters did not continue to ask about Jurassic Park and Firefly Pictures. Instead, they focused on Firefly Software. This press conference quickly generated a huge response in the media inside and outside Hollywood. Many people knew that this was the digital field's first counterattack against the recent poaching. The purpose was to prevent Autodesk from entering the special effects software market and maintain the digital field's leading position in the industry. After the conference, Carol Bartz, the chairman of the board and CEO of Autodesk, said in an interview that Autodesk would not give up on entering the film and television special effects software market. However, a few days later, news came out that Autodesk's board of directors had a disagreement on the strategy of entering the film and television special effects software market. This was because the lethality of Firefly's move was too great. Although Autodesk only needed half a year to launch a mature special effects software, it was estimated that Firefly Software had occupied 90% of the market in this half a year. And Firefly Software also had an advantage that Autodesk did not have, which was the digital field, a giant in the special effects industry. The cost and technical advantages generated by the close cooperation of these two companies were definitely incomparable to Autodesk, which could only produce tools, but did not have its own experimental field. Although Autodesk had previously reached some cooperation intentions with Industrial Light and Magic, the two parties were two companies after all. It was impossible for them to cooperate as intimately as Firefly Software and Digital Field. Subsequently, Industrial Light and Magic's approach also confirmed Autodesk's concerns. Only a week after the Firefly Software conference was held, Industrial Light and Magic announced to the public that they had decided to use Firefly Software's products. The day of the announcement was accompanied by an intimate handshake photo of George Lucas and Firefly Software's CEO, Ed Kamal. George Lucas' approach was of course a helpless move. Although Industrial Light and Magic also had a set of independently developed software tools before this, their performance was completely incomparable to the digital field. If they gave up on the cooperation with Firefly Software this time, then Industrial Light and Magic's CG special effects production level was likely to be worse than those third-rate special effects studios using tools such as Maya. In that case, Industrial Light and Magic would definitely decline rapidly. When the news of the cooperation between Industrial Light and Magic and Firefly Software came out, Autodesk's board of directors directly rejected the management's proposal to establish a special effects software department. While establishing Firefly Software, Eric and the management of Firefly also began to work hard to retain the digital field employees. They adopted a series of measures to increase their salary and benefits. Digital Field did not stop the employees who insisted on leaving. Instead, they encouraged these employees to set up their own special effects studio and rely on Digital Field as an affiliate. They also promised these studios that not only could they use the special effects software at a discounted price, but they could also receive a certain number of outsourced projects from Digital Field. This measure could indirectly keep these people in Digital Field's camp and weaken the competitiveness of their opponents in another way. This measure was very attractive to many people. Continuing to be an employee in another company was not as comfortable as being their own boss, even if it was just a small studio boss. After this measure was implemented, some micro special effects companies that originally had nothing to do with Digital Field also expressed their desire to join Digital Field's camp in hopes of receiving the corresponding benefits. Digital Field also selectively accepted a batch of them. Because these small special effects companies affiliated with the Digital Domain camp relied too much on the Digital Domain headquarters in terms of technology and projects, Eric wasn't worried that there would be another behemoth that would threaten the Digital Domain. In fact, this method also accelerated the expansion of the Firefly special effects software tool. More than a week later, the resignation storm in Digital Field finally subsided. Stimulated by this incident, in order to ensure that similar incidents would not happen in the company in the future, Eric began to formulate an equity incentive plan for all of Firefly's member companies. Through the equity incentive plan that covered the entire company, it deepened Firefly's sense of belonging and cohesion to Firefly's employees. During this process, Pixar's second 3D animation, The Bug Crisis, was officially released on more than 2,500 screens in North America. This insect-themed animation attracted a large number of audiences of all ages with its interesting characters and plot that was suitable for both young and old. It received $33 million in box office on its first weekend and was expected to reach $50 million in the first week. Although it could not be compared to the box office of Jurassic Park in the first week, The Bug Crisis was already in the ranks of the hottest blockbusters. The cost of this 3D animation was only about $70 million. Based on the North American box office trend, the film could basically recoup its cost by releasing it in the North American market. As an animated film, the profit from the licensing of Bug Crisis was the biggest source of profit. In just 3 days after the movie's release, hundreds of Disney stores in the United States generated nearly $12 million in sales. By the way, the products of Jurassic Park were also released at the same time as the movie was released through Disney stores. In nearly a month, the sales of the products had successfully exceeded $100 million. Eric deliberately imitated the original and gave a few clear close-ups of the products of Jurassic Park in the movie. Moreover, the history seemed to be surprisingly similar. Because of Dr. Hardman's granddaughter, Lex, a series of pig teammates in the movie, the girl's figurine image became the most unpopular product of Jurassic Park. Eric forgot to remind them of this, causing Disney's Toy Factory to produce a batch of Lex's figurines in advance. As a result, the other characters' figurines were out of stock several times, but not even half of the original batch of Lex's figurines were sold out. Staying in Los Angeles meant that one was busy. Often, other things would come one after another before one could finish the things on hand. Of course, most of the things were related to the movie. Although the direct profit generated by Firefly's movie business was getting smaller and smaller in the company's total profit, no one could underestimate this area. The movie business was like the engine of a movie company. Only when the engine was powerful enough could it lead the other businesses to develop quickly. After deciding to give up on the acquisition of Mike Mira, Firefly Pictures restarted the Black Ant brand and set up a specialized indie film investment department. After a period of screening, some scripts were sent to Eric one after another. After Quentin Tarantino shot to fame with Drowning Dog, he happily played around in many B-movies for 2 years. Finally, he remembered that he still had work to do. After Eric's urging and advice, Quentin finally took out the script for Pulp Novel. Eric also gave some suggestions based on his memory of the original, such as the choice of the male and female lead, as well as the classic twist dance. Perhaps many people who had watched Pulp Novel did not understand what was so classic about the twist dance performed by John Travolta and Uma Thurman. However, when the movie was first released in North America, many North American audiences who had experienced the popularity of the movie would have tears in their eyes when they saw this scene. It all started in 1978. That year, Paramount Pictures released a very anti-traditional musical film, The Hot Prodigal. The male lead of the movie was John Travolta from Pulp Novel. As soon as the movie was released, it immediately caused a sensation among North American teenagers. At half the price of the movie in the 1990s, the movie took the North American box office of $170 million. It was no surprise that it won the box office that year. Moreover, the movie also led the popular disco trend and set a sales record for the soundtrack that had not been broken for many years. Hot Prodigal happened to have a lot of scenes where the male lead played by John Travolta had a dance competition with people in a disco. Many years later, Pulp Fiction recreated the classic scene from Hot Prodigal more than 10 years ago through John Travolta and Uma Thurman participating in a twist dance competition in a dance hall. The effect was just like how Brother F.A. appeared on the screen wearing a trench coat and biting a toothpick many years after Heroes. It was as emotional as Brother F.A.'s appearance on the screen in a trench coat with a toothpick in his mouth. If a more vulgar word was used to describe this feeling, it would be called feelings. Chapter 535. In addition to Pulp Novel, Assassin Leon, which was recommended by Paris Disneyland's CEO, Patrick Schneider, was also officially launched. France's Gaumont Film Company originally intended to invest in Luc Besson's new film alone, but they were more than happy to cooperate with Hollywood's Firefly. For this reason, the chairman of Gaumont Film Company, Nicolas Seydoux, personally flew to Los Angeles. When Paris Disneyland opened last year, Eric attended a party hosted by the Seydoux family when he went to Paris. The two parties had met once. Since the other party was so serious about this matter, Eric personally took the time to invite the other party to a banquet to show his respect. Gaumont Film Company had a history of nearly 100 years in France. It was one of the few film companies in France that specialized in producing commercial films. Maintaining a cooperative relationship with such a French local would play a very important role in further opening up the French film market. Because he was at Firefly Studios in the morning to check on the post-production progress of several of the company's films, Eric chose Venice Beach as the location for the banquet. After the two had dinner, they chatted for a few hours in a cafe before Nicolas Seydoux left. After seeing the other party off, Eric continued to sit by the window and drink coffee. Today was July 1st. It had been nearly half a month since he returned to Los Angeles. The chaos caused by the resignation crisis in the digital domain had passed. Because they were prepared in advance, although Pixar's 3D animation Bug Crisis still performed very well at the box office, Pixar did not experience the same situation as the digital domain. Of course, several other Hollywood film companies were jealous of the huge box office profits brought by Bug Crisis. However, although Pixar's first, Toy Story, only cost $40 million, the cost of the second Bug Crisis had skyrocketed to $70 million. It was completely at the level of a blockbuster. Although the other 6 major film companies could afford this production cost, they had a 2-year production cycle and lacked production experience. In addition, the other 6 major film companies did not have Disney's rich peripheral operation experience and perfect Disney's retail network. Most of the companies were hesitant about whether to develop their own 3D animated films. However, Eric is the one who understands the prospects of 3D animated movies the most. He knows that even without the peripheral operation system on the internet, the commercial prospects of 3D movies are very broad. In the original spacetime, almost every year in the next 10 years, there will be 3D animated movies in the top 10 of the Hollywood box office. Therefore, Eric was already considering expanding the scale of Firefly's 3D animation department to at least release one 3D animation every year. Thinking about these things, Eric saw Alan walk in from the entrance of the coffee shop. For a period of time, Eric also wanted to get himself a new assistant. It would be best if it was a beautiful woman with exquisite looks and ability. Unfortunately, this matter ended in failure. Eric wanted to let Jennifer Connelly, who received a degree in History of Stan last year, try it out. Connelly was also enthusiastic at first, but the girl interned in his assistant's office for less than a month and directly quit because of the complicated work. The girl was a Persian cat, and her small brain was not very smart. She was more suitable for a comfortable life. Now, her life was to occasionally take 1 or 2 movies to show her presence. The rest of her life was to enjoy life. She flew around the fashion capitals of the world, participated in various fashion activities, and followed the trend with interest to create a clothing brand under her own name. A lot of money was spent, but there was no result. Eric didn't care. The last thing he lacked now was money. As long as the girl was obedient, he could do whatever he wanted. Alan walked to his side and said, "Mr. Lin just called. According to the current box office trend, the North American box office of Jurassic Park will exceed $300 million next week. He asked me to ask if the company wants to prepare a celebration party." From June 4th to now, Jurassic Park had been in theaters for 4 weeks, and the total box office had reached $280 million. Although the weekly box office had now dropped to about $30 million, and the release of Collision next week might bring a big drop in the box office of this dinosaur movie, the total box office of Jurassic Park next week would not be a problem for the total box office of Jurassic Park to exceed $300 million next week. Eric looked at his watch. It was already 3:30 in the afternoon. Collision would be released in North America tomorrow. In the evening, he would attend the premiere of the movie in Los Angeles. Tomorrow, he would fly to Europe again to attend the premiere of Jurassic Park in Berlin. In late July, he might also go to Asia. As the largest film market in Asia, Eric also needed to personally appear at the premiere of Jurassic Park in Japan. It could be said that he still had to live the life of a flying man throughout July. Let's postpone this matter. At present, most of the main creators of the movie are promoting the movie in Europe. Without them, there is no point in holding a celebration party. Let's wait until the global box office of the movie breaks $1 billion. According to the global release schedule, the total box office of the movie may not break $1 billion until after October, or even November at the latest. Then after October, I don't care about the next few months, Eric said. The celebration party of the global box office of the movie breaking $1 billion is more meaningful to Firefly. That's it for now. Is there anything else? Alan shook his head. No, the premiere of Collision starts at 7 o'clock. You can sit here until 5:30. Eric smiled and finished the coffee in front of him. He stood up and said, "The 3 female leads of Thunderbolt have been training in Santa Monica. I haven't seen the other 2 yet. Since there are still 2 hours left, let's go take a look. I'll arrange a car." Alan nodded and walked out. The 3 angels had been training for more than 2 months. Even Kate Beckinsale, who couldn't even do basic skills like splits at the beginning, could now perform a complete set of boxing skills. The martial arts director invited by Firefly was a member of the famous Yuan family troupe across the ocean. The head of the Yuan family troupe would definitely not come personally to teach the 3 girls. The one who came was the 3rd son of the Yuan family, Yuan Shiurin, the wretched old man who sold the Buddha's palm in Kung Fu Hustle. As for Firefly's request for him to train the 3 girls for 3 months, Yuan Shiurin actually did not quite understand it. According to his view, nothing could be achieved in 3 months. If he wanted to be a hit girl, he definitely had to start training from a young age. It was better to use more stunt doubles during filming than to start training halfway. However, Firefly's salary was very generous. Coupled with the fact that the Hong Kong film industry was declining, there were only a few people left who could live comfortably. Of course, Yuan Shiurin wouldn't refuse an invitation from a Hollywood movie giant at this time. As the training entered the last stage, the actual combat segment had already begun. In the spacious training room, the 3 girls were fighting with a few martial arts masters from the Yuan family troupe. From time to time, they would laugh and laugh. Of course, the martial arts masters couldn't really attack the girls. They just carefully fed them moves. Yuan Shiurin stood at the side with his arms crossed. From time to time, he would give a few instructions. The door of the training room was suddenly pushed open. A Chinese young man came over and whispered a few words in Yuan Shiurin's ear. Yuan Shiurin immediately waved his hand to stop the few people fighting in the field. "Okay, that's all for now. Take a break." After explaining this matter, Yuan Shiurin followed the Chinese young man out of the training room. In a lounge next to the training room, Yuan Shiurin opened the door and saw Eric, who just got up from the sofa. He quickly greeted him and shook hands with Eric. He said in somewhat choppy English, "Hello, Mr. Williams." "Hello, Mr. Yuan." Eric shook hands with him. The 2 of them sat down together. Only then did Eric say, "I just happened to have some time, so I came over to see how Kate and the rest's training is going." Yuan Shiurin could still understand these simple English words. Moreover, the Chinese young man beside them was also a translator provided by Firefly. There was no problem with the 2 of them communicating. "Mr. Williams, other than Miss Beckinsale, the other 2 girls have a very good foundation. The 3 of them are improving very quickly. Even if the movie starts immediately, there won't be a problem." Eric nodded with satisfaction. "Then, after the filming of Thunderbolt Charming Baby starts in the future, I'll have to trouble Mr. Yuan to continue to be the action director." Yuan Shiurin quickly replied, "Of course, no problem. I'll do my best." "All right, Mr. Yuan, Mr. Wu is also filming another movie in Los Angeles. Have the 2 of you met?" "Yes, I've even had a few meals with him, Yuan Shuren replied with a hint of envy in his tone. After the success of Mr. and Mrs. Smith, White Pigeon Wu was immediately promoted to a Hollywood A-list director. At this time, he was filming another movie that Eric gave him, Broken Arrow. This movie was the script that Eric gave him after talking to Peter Guber last time. In the original space-time, Broken Arrow's results were not as good as Face/Off. However, because it was a co-development with Columbia, Eric naturally wanted to keep the best for himself. After White Pigeon Wu finished filming Broken Arrow, it wouldn't be too late for Firefly to invest in Face/Off on its own. The two of them chatted in the lounge for a while before Eric stood up. He planned to go to the training room next door to check on the three girls. Yuan Shuren had also heard of some of Eric's achievements. In addition, today's training was almost over. He said, "Mr. Williams, today's training is almost over. I won't be accompanying you. You can take the three of them and leave directly." Eric was stunned for a moment, but he quickly smiled and said, "All right then. You should go back and rest too." After the two of them said goodbye, Yuan Shuren called a few of his apprentices and left the training room together. Eric sent Yuan Shuren and the others off before walking to the training room. Penelope took a drink from the female assistant that the company assigned to the three of them. She took a few big gulps and sighed, last 2 weeks. Just 2 more weeks and we'll be free." Charlie took a towel and wiped the sweat on his body. He said, "It's still early. Who knows? Maybe the filming will be more tiring. But it definitely won't be as boring as it is now." Penelope returned the drink to the female assistant and took the towel. On the other side, Kate found her clothes from the clothes rack and took out a pack of cigarettes. She then walked to the balcony on the south side of the training room. Because of the hot weather, the training room was even more stuffy. The other two girls saw Kate Beckinsale's actions and followed her to the balcony to get some fresh air. There were no chairs in the training room, so the three girls pulled out a sponge cushion and sat down. "Do you want one?" Kate lit a cigarette and took a deep puff before asking the two girls beside her. Charlie turned around and glanced at the training room. Only their bespectacled assistant was packing up. The others were nowhere to be seen. She took a cigarette from Kate and lit it up. Penelope saw that the two girls had started smoking without being left out, so she lit one as well. When Eric came in from outside, he saw that there was only a black-haired girl with glasses in the empty training room. Seeing her, the black-haired girl's face immediately became a little nervous, which made Eric feel very strange. Although he was a little confused, Eric still asked, "Where are the three of them?" The girl hesitated for a moment, but still reached out and pointed at the balcony exit. She hoped that the three girls had finished smoking. Otherwise, if they were caught red-handed by this young man, who knew what would happen? Eric touched his cheek, feeling a little strange about the girl's reaction. However, he still walked towards the balcony. When he arrived at the entrance, Eric saw that the three girls were sitting cross-legged or leaning forward on a green sponge cushion. The three of them each had a cigarette in their hand and were smoking happily. Eric shrugged, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. He finally understood the reason for the girls' reaction just now. Eric absolutely didn't like to see girls smoking, but he didn't dislike it either. However, looking at the three beautiful women in tight-fitting training clothes in front of him smoking together, he had a strange feeling. Thinking of this, Eric took 2 steps forward and squatted down beside Kate, who was on the far left. He took out a cigarette from the cigarette box beside her leg and waved it at the three girls who were stunned when they saw him. "Can I have one too?" It wasn't until Eric picked up the lighter and lit the cigarette that the three girls jumped up like frightened cats. They threw away the cigarette butts in their hands and said awkwardly, "Mr. Williams, hello." Eric nodded and looked at the three girls who looked like they were waiting to be criticized. He smiled and said, "I just happened to be free, so I came to see how your training was going. I didn't expect to see this scene. If I had known, I would have brought my camera. After you become famous, if I have a photo like this, I can sell it to the tabloids and make a lot of money." Chapter 536. Hearing Eric's slightly teasing tone, The three girls pulled the corners of their mouths together, but they couldn't laugh out loud. Penelope was extremely regretful at this time. She even hated Kate, who was standing beside her. If it weren't for the smoking pipe's instigation, she would never smoke here. Among the three of them, she was the least addicted to smoking, and this was the first time she smoked during training. She didn't expect to be so unlucky as to be caught red-handed by Eric Williams. Although Eric Williams didn't seem to be angry, this bad impression was definitely left. Charlize also felt a burst of regret at this time. She secretly swore that she would never touch this thing again. Kate Beckinsale, on the other hand, quickly relaxed after the initial worry. She was born in the British middle class, and her family situation was much better than the other two girls. Although her biological father died early, her mother and stepfather had some connections in the British film and television industry. Even if she lost this role and returned to the United Kingdom, she wouldn't have to worry about not having a role. Therefore, after a short period of worry, Kate even secretly sized up the legendary Hollywood youth in front of her. Although she knew that the youth in front of her was only 23 years old, Kate didn't see any of the arrogance and impetuousness that young people of this age often had in Eric. His every movement carried the calmness and indifference of an adult who had experienced the world. Eric stood up when the three girls jumped up in fright. He leaned against the balcony railing and looked at the three girls in the corner with a smile. He smiled and shook the cigarette box in his hand. "Whose is this?" Penelope and Charlize looked at Kate together. Kate, who had already relaxed, finally couldn't help but feel nervous when Eric spoke and the other two girls cast their gazes on her. In fact, Eric had already expected that the cigarette in his hand was Kate Beckinsale's. There were definitely a lot of female celebrities who smoked in Hollywood, but there were not many who were known to be addicted to smoking. Kate was one of them. This somewhat maverick British rose had been photographed by paparazzi more than once smoking in public. Even in front of the camera, she had no intention of hiding it. Facing Eric's gaze, Kate was just about to muster up her courage to say something when she saw Eric leisurely put the pack of cigarettes into his pocket. He then looked at the two girls beside her and said, "Charlie, Penny, help me keep an eye on Kate. Don't let her smoke again, at least not before the contract for Whopper Girls is completed. No matter who informs me that Kate is smoking again, your pay will be reduced by 10% each time." When the three girls heard Eric's words, their eyes widened. Penelope couldn't help but point at Kate. Then what about her? Eric revealed a slightly mischievous smile. "Kate's pay will remain unchanged." At this time, Kate finally opened her mouth. "Mr. Williams, it's all my fault. If you want to deduct my pay, then deduct mine. It has nothing to do with Charlize and Penny." Eric shook his head gently. "No, if you don't feel bad about deducting your pay, then deduct theirs." Ever since the first date, Charlize had always had an inexplicable grudge against Eric. When she heard Eric's outrageous punishment, she finally couldn't help but raise her voice. "You're really unreasonable." Eric looked at Charlize's delicate face that still had some baby fat. He resisted the urge to reach out and pinch it. "I'm so busy. I don't have time to reason with you." Eric ignored the three girls who were rolling their eyes. He extinguished the remaining half of the cigarette in his hand and threw it into the trash can at the side. He clapped his hands and looked at the girls who were still standing in front of him. "Go and change your clothes. Mr. Yuan said that your performance in the past 2 months was very good. As a reward, I'll treat you to the premiere of Clash of Heaven and Earth tonight." The three girls looked at each other. Penelope took the lead and walked towards the training room. Kate followed closely behind. Charlize originally wanted to say something, but the moment her gaze met with Eric's, she immediately avoided his gaze. She walked into the training room reluctantly. Kate and Charlize walked into the changing room one after another. They saw that Penelope had already taken off her training clothes, leaving only her sexy underwear. However, the Spanish girl was not in a hurry to change into her usual clothes. Instead, she took out her makeup tools from her bag and started to carefully apply makeup in front of the mirror. When Kate saw this, she couldn't help but tease, "Penny, I don't think you need makeup. As long as you go out wearing this, Eric Williams will definitely be infatuated with you." Penelope was unmoved. She frowned and said, "Humph, you still dare to say that? If you didn't encourage me and Charlize to smoke, such an embarrassing thing wouldn't have happened." Kate didn't feel too burdened. She said while changing her clothes, "Don't worry. At most, I won't smoke for the next few months. Who knows if you can endure it or not?" Charlize folded the training clothes she took off and put them in the closet. While the other two girls were bickering, she said, "Hey, haven't you guys thought about why Eric Williams suddenly came to see us?" Kate had just put on a little t-shirt that exposed her navel. She held her jeans in one hand and put one hand on her waist in front of the full-length mirror, striking a sexy pose. She looked at the fair and seductive girl in the mirror and said narcissistically, "Do you even need to say it? It's too obvious. But I definitely won't let this playboy get what he wants." After Kate finished speaking, she looked at Penelope with a look of disappointment. Penelope couldn't stand Kate's gaze. She retorted, "What are you doing? You have a boyfriend, but I don't." Kate said unhappily, "Who told you that I have a boyfriend?" "Then who's the guy who called you last weekend? I just met him during the filming of Much Ado About Nothing. I didn't agree to be his girlfriend." Charlize listened to the two girls muttering in silence. After changing into her casual clothes, she looked at Penelope, who had just finished putting on her makeup and was slowly putting on her clothes. She couldn't help but untie the ponytail that she had tied up because she was practicing martial arts. She looked at the dressing mirror not far away and used her fingers to fix her hair. Because it was summer, the three girls were wearing very light clothes. In addition, they were at the age of blooming flowers. They exuded a youthful aura from head to toe. Eric couldn't help but have a feeling that his eyes lit up. Noticing the slight change in Eric's expression, Penelope was slightly happy. She came over and asked, "Mr. Williams, where are we going next?" Eric pointed outside and said as he walked, "I originally wanted to let you guys show up on the red carpet to promote Thunderbolt Girls. Now, forget it. If the three of you appear together, I'm afraid that Clash of Heaven and Earth will steal a lot of the attention tomorrow. Let's wait until the press conference for Thunderbolt Girls." Penelope ignored the two girls behind her. She followed Eric step by step and said, "Then this time, I'll arrange for you guys to go in directly. After the premiere, I'll treat you guys to dinner. How about that?" "Okay, but I heard that there's usually a party after a movie premiere. Do you want to go?" We'll listen to your arrangements." "Oh, forget it this time. I have to go to Europe tomorrow. It's not suitable for me to stay out too late. I won't bring you guys to the party. Next time." "Okay." Penelope quickly nodded obediently. Charlie and Kate, who were behind Eric and Penelope, heard the conversation between the two. They curled their lips at the same time but did not object to Eric's arrangement. Eric took the three girls downstairs and asked the girls to squeeze into the back seat of his car. He then got into the front passenger seat and told the driver to drive. Even though the premiere started at 7 o'clock, at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, a long red carpet was laid out outside the Chinese Grand Theater on the Walk of Fame. The two sides of the red carpet were filled with media and movie fans who came to attend the premiere. Of course, Eric couldn't bring the three girls straight to the Chinese Grand Theater. Instead, he stopped at a hotel not far away where the main cast of the movie and the guests of the premiere were temporarily staying. He handed the girls over to the staff and began to socialize. When the stars saw Eric appear, they all came over to greet him. Eric socialized for a while before he walked over to the director of Clash of Heaven and Earth, Roland Emmerich. "Eric, congratulations. The box office of Jurassic Park is amazing." "Thank you, Roland. I believe that Clash of Heaven and Earth will also achieve great results," Eric said. He then greeted John Landau, who was in charge of Clash of Heaven and Earth, and asked, "What were you guys talking about?" John Landau was originally the exclusive producer that Eric prepared for Cameron. However, Cameron only made a movie once every 2 or 3 years, so Eric asked Roland Emmerich to partner with John Landau on Clash of Heaven and Earth. The results were very good. Hearing Eric's question, John Landau pointed at Roland Emmerich and said, "Roland is still a little worried about the box office of Clash of Heaven and Earth. This is the first movie that he invested more than $50 million in. To be honest, I'm a little nervous too." Because of the amazing box office results of Jurassic Park, as the second CG special effects blockbuster released by Firefly this summer, it attracted as much media attention as Jurassic Park. The final production cost of the two movies was almost the same. Eric could understand the psychological pressure that Roland Emmerich was under. However, compared to Roland Emmerich, Eric was much more relaxed. Starting from the earliest Noah's Ark, Roland Emmerich had nearly 10 years of experience as a director. His personal style was very mature. With Eric's personal supervision, this version of Clash of Heaven and Earth was definitely much better than the original in Eric's opinion. Moreover, it was still 1993. CG special effects had just become popular a few years ago. The North American film market and even the world's film market were still in a state of hunger for CG special effects blockbusters. Clash of Heaven and Earth would definitely achieve a good box office result. Eric didn't hide anything. He told the two of them his thoughts. Roland Emmerich also knew that Eric's words made sense. He nodded in agreement, but the anxiety on his face didn't dissipate too much. Eric also knew that only real box office results could make Roland Emmerich feel completely relieved. This was a common problem for many directors before the release of their movies. Even Eric himself felt a little uneasy before the release of Jurassic Park. Therefore, he didn't comfort him too much. The press conference for the premiere was arranged after the screening of the movie, so the red carpet was much simpler. Eric walked leisurely across the long red carpet, signed his name on the signature wall, and quickly entered the theater. When he was about to reach his seat in the front row, Eric heard a slightly accented female voice on his left. "Mr. Williams." He turned his head and saw three girls sitting side by side. Penelope was talking and waving at him. Eric nodded slightly. Many people greeted him along the way, so the girl's behavior didn't attract much attention. However, Eric felt that this Spanish girl really didn't hide her thoughts at all. Compared to the careless Kate and the inexplicably resistant Charlie, Penelope was like a little wild cat that pounced on him without hesitation. In his memory, a certain big-mouthed male star in Hollywood gave Penelope Cruz a very appropriate nickname, Troublesome. In the original space-time, ever since this hot Spanish girl entered Hollywood, she almost always had a scandal with the male lead in every movie she filmed. Because of this, she even broke up a few couples and was jokingly called the professional Hollywood mistress. In his previous life, after Tom and Nicole parted ways, he was very high profile with Penelope for a period of time. It was obvious that he wanted Penelope to be the third Tom's wife. However, the reason why the two parted ways again, in Eric's opinion, was probably because Tom felt that he couldn't control this restless seductress, so he made such a decision. Thinking of this, Eric became a little interested. He wanted to see what kind of small waves this seductress could stir up in this space-time. Eric found a seat and sat down. The host of the premiere said a few words and announced the start of the screening. The lights in the theater quickly dimmed, and the familiar opening of Firefly Pictures appeared on the big screen. After many revisions to the script, this version of Collision was very different from the original version. It could even be said that they were two completely different movies. Many of the side plots that were incompatible with the movie's theme in the original version were removed. After the discovery of the comet that was about to hit Earth, Roland Emmerich focused on the three main characters: the federal government, the female reporter Jenny Lena, and the boy who discovered the comet, Leo Bademan. Through the skillful interweaving of the plot and clever suspense setting, in the first 40 minutes of the movie, the audience in the theater was tightly grasped. During one of his astronomical observations, the boy, Leo Bademan, discovered a comet that had never appeared on the star chart. So he reported this news to his mentor. Later, an astronomer calculated that the comet's orbit would overlap with the Earth's. In other words, the comet was about to hit the Earth. When the astronomer anxiously wanted to pass the news to the federal government, an accident happened. There was a big suspense in the plot, and then the time jumped directly to a year later. The female reporter Jenny Lena was tirelessly investigating a scandal. In the end, the breakthrough of the matter was fixed on a woman named Ellie. In the process, the federal president suddenly appeared, hoping that Jenny Lena could stop the investigation. Jenny refused the president and continued her investigation. The final discovery surprised her. It turned out that Ellie was not a person, but a comet that was about to hit Earth. At the same time, the boy Leo, who discovered the comet last year, was still living an ordinary life in a small town like many American high school students. No one was aware of the impending disaster. When Jenny gradually got closer to the truth, the federal government finally decided to publicly reveal the truth to the public. Jenny was also invited to be the first to ask the president at the press conference. It turned out that although the astronomer had an accident in the process of transmitting the news that the comet was about to hit Earth was still discovered. In order to solve this crisis, several large countries joined forces and spent a year building a space shuttle loaded with nuclear bombs. They planned to use nuclear bombs to blow up the comet before it hit Earth. However, in order to avoid causing panic as much as possible, the governments of each country unanimously chose to hide the news. The plot began here, and Roland Emmerich's ability to control the plot began to show itself. Just like the 2012 movie In Roland's Memory, every minute was thrilling. Starting from the launch of the space shuttle to the comet, the decision of the Federation government, the fate of the small fry, and the struggle of human nature under the disaster, it all grabbed the audience's attention. When the first failed attempt to blow up the comet, causing part of the comet to crash into Earth and cause a huge tsunami scene appeared in front of the audience, many exclamations could be heard in the theater tomorrow. The tsunami scene was about 10 minutes long, and it was completely created with the most advanced CG technology in the digital field. Compared to the miniature model shooting, which could be distinguished at a glance, the CG shot made it difficult for everyone to distinguish the real thing from the fake. When the monstrous wave crashed into New York, and the Statue of Liberty and the Empire State Building collapsed one after another, there were even exclamations of, "Oh, my God!" in the theater. Eric sensed the reactions of the audience in the theater and leaned over to Roland Emmerich, who was sitting next to him, and whispered in his ear, "Roland, you can rest assured now. Maybe we can find some time to discuss your next movie. What do you think of the script of Poison Day?" Other than some film critics, most of the people invited to the premiere were hardcore movie fans. Even these people had such an obvious and strong reaction to the movie, so it was impossible for the movie not to cause a sensation among ordinary audiences. Roland Emmerich knew this very well. "If you can spare some time, of course I'm fine with it," Roland said in a relaxed tone, "but I heard that you have to go to Europe tomorrow. I don't know when you'll be back." "That's not a problem. If I have to do everything personally, then what's the point of being a boss?" The two of them smiled at the same time. Seeing that the movie was about to come to an end, Eric whispered to the person next to him and got up to go to the bathroom. Although most of the people in the theater were focused on the screen, when Eric got up, some people still noticed his movements. Penelope glanced at Kate, who was staring intently at the screen, carefully got up from her seat and chased after the figure that she had been watching disappear. Kate, who was a little insensitive, didn't care when she saw Penelope get up. Charlie, on the other hand, kept watching Penelope's figure until he saw the Spanish girl disappear into the exit that the man had just passed through. He muttered something in a low voice. He was a little unwilling, a little depressed, and a little inferior. Soon, these emotions were focused on the man, so Charlie gritted his teeth and became angry. He couldn't focus on the movie anymore. "This is my only chance. If I miss it, I don't know when I'll have to wait for the next time," Penelope thought in her heart. She had already passed through a small door and arrived at a corridor. She just happened to see Eric's figure disappear around the corner, so she chased after him without hesitation. As soon as the Spanish girl turned the corner, she immediately bumped into someone. Just as she was about to apologize, she heard Eric's voice. "Girl, are you looking for someone?" Penelope stood still and noticed Eric's teasing gaze. Not only did she not feel embarrassed, but she boldly looked at Eric and said, "Mr. Williams, what a coincidence." "Yeah, it's quite a coincidence," Eric said with a smile. He continued to take a few steps forward and pushed open the door of the men's bathroom. He went in to relieve himself. After he came out, He saw the Spanish girl standing in front of the sink, putting on light makeup on her face. Eric obviously wouldn't refuse the prey that was sent to his mouth. He turned on the tap next to the girl and washed his hands. He whispered in the girl's ear, "There's no one inside. Do you want to go in and take a look?" Penelope's body stiffened. After a moment, she gave Eric a charming smile. Her wild eyes had a little bit of provocation. "Okay, as long as you're not afraid of being discovered." Eric led the girl into the men's washroom and placed a sign outside the washroom that said, "Cleaning is in progress." Chapter 537. In the theater, the screening of Clash of Heaven and Earth had already ended. The audience and reporters were still immersed in the CG disaster scene of the tsunami hitting Manhattan. They were all asking questions to the director, Roland Emmerich, and the other main creators. Not many people noticed that Eric had left early. Like many other fans who were invited to the premiere, Kate stayed in the theater and marveled at the disaster scene. She noticed Charlie's absent-minded look and looked at the empty seat on the other side for a while before she finally realized something. She asked, "Where's Penny?" Charlie pouted at the stage. Kate looked over and found that Eric was not on the stage. She quickly reacted and covered her mouth in surprise. "No way, Penny. So fast?" Charlie cursed in a low voice. She did not want to stay any longer. She got up and was about to leave. A young man in his 30s walked along the aisle and said to the two girls, "Miss Beckinsale, Miss Theron, I'm Mr. Williams's assistant. He had something to do at the last minute and asked me to apologize on his behalf. I'll treat you to dinner next time. He also asked me to send you back." The two girls looked at each other strangely and then looked at Ellen together. Alan also felt a little embarrassed, but he could only shrug helplessly and make an expression that everyone understood. After a short silence, Charlie said, "Sir, we can go back by ourselves. You don't have to send us back. You can call me Alan, Miss Charlie. We met a few months ago at Firefly Cineplex," Alan explained and said, "The car is already outside the theater. It's just the end time now. It's not so easy to get a car." Kate heard this and gently pulled Charlie. She said to Alan, "Thank you, Alan. Let's go." After returning to Santa Monica's place and thanking the driver, Kate said to Charles, who had been silent for a long time, "Don't worry about it. You don't look any worse than Penny. You definitely still have a chance." When Charlie heard this, she glared at Kate angrily. "What are you talking about? I'm not." Kate took out half a bag of snacks from the movie and popped one into her mouth. She glanced at Charlie with a sneaky smile and said, "Since you don't have it, open the door." "I don't have the key." Charlie took out a bunch of keys and walked to the door as he tried to explain, "I just think that Penny is too." At this point, Charles paused. Even when he opened the door, he couldn't find a suitable adjective. Too utilitarian? Wasn't she a utilitarian as well? How many people in Hollywood didn't pursue their dreams of stardom? Too licentious? It wasn't accurate either. If it wasn't for Eric Williams, with Penelope's personality, she wouldn't have stuck to him so openly. Clash's midnight box office is $2.68 million, surpassing Batman to take second place in North America. Los Angeles Times, after Tornado, another classic disaster film came out of nowhere. Collision showed us the disaster scenes that could only exist in our imagination in the past with amazing CG special effects. San Francisco Chronicle, Clash's outstanding midnight box office results once again prove the huge commercial prospects of CG special effects films. It is conceivable that after more than 80 years of development, Hollywood will once again usher in a new round of fundamental technological changes after sound films and color films. Chicago Tribune, when Jurassic Park was still crazily reaping profits in North America and even in the global box office, Firefly Pictures once again released an amazing special effects film. The midnight box office of Clash also undoubtedly proved its amazing commercial value. At the same time, a week ago, Firefly Pictures' digital domain announced that its special effects software series would be sold to the public. Hollywood was excited about this. But what worries me is that as Hollywood films become more and more commercialized, the new generation of directors, including Eric Williams, James Cameron, and Roland Emmerich, have forgotten the artistic nature of films. They only pursue the most dazzling visual effects and the most blatant monetary benefits. Firefly Pictures even submitted 0 nominations at last year's Oscars. This is a pity. It was already the next morning. In the dining room of the Sharp Corner Manor, Eric was leisurely reading the new day's newspaper while eating breakfast as usual. While reading an old critical article by a conservative Hollywood film critic in the Chicago Sun, Eric felt a slight sound behind him. He turned his head and saw Penelope walk in barefoot like a cat. "Good morning, little wild cat," Eric smiled and said hello. He pointed to the kitchen and said, "I made breakfast for 2. Your portion is in the kitchen." Penelope, who hadn't put on any makeup, had lost some of her wildness and gained a hint of elegance. Hearing Eric call her a little wild cat, Penelope smiled a little awkwardly and said good morning softly before tiptoeing to the kitchen. After being trained by Eric for an entire night, the wildness on the Spanish girl's body had disappeared without a trace. She now looked more like a lazy house cat. After last night, Eric ate a little, but Penelope fell asleep due to exhaustion. The girl was also very hungry now. When she walked to the dining room with breakfast, she could not help but pick up a piece of bread and put it in her mouth. Eric saw Penelope's eager expression and could not help but tease her again. "You look more like a little wild cat now. Are you starving?" Penelope did not speak but sat down beside Eric obediently. Eric was very satisfied with the Spanish girl's attitude now. It seemed that last night's torment was not in vain. He continued to read the newspaper in his hand and said, "I'll call later." You can rest today and don't have to go to training. It just so happens that tomorrow and the day after tomorrow are the weekends. You can rest until next Monday. Of course, if you still have energy, I can also ask someone to send you to Santa Monica. AI. Eric, can I stay here? Eric looked at the Spanish girl with a smile and nodded. Of course, you can stay until Monday before leaving. But I have to go to Europe today, so I can't accompany you. Penelope bit her lower lip gently. She believed that Eric just understood the meaning of her sentence. However, since Eric refused, although she was a little unwilling, the girl did not dare to ask for a yard after last night's lesson. Eric was very satisfied with Penelope's action of knowing when to stop. He continued to read the newspaper in front of him. When the Spanish girl finished her breakfast, she took the initiative to clean up her and his tableware. When he sat beside her again, Eric took out a credit card from his shirt pocket and handed it over. Penelope looked at the Citibank VIP credit card on the table and raised her right hand that was on her knee. She quickly suppressed the thoughts in her heart and put them down. "Eric, I don't want it. I'm not doing it for money. If you are doing it for money, I will give you a check, not a credit card." Eric looked at the Spanish girl and said, "You have to know that not every girl can get a credit card from me. This card is equivalent to a contract. I think a smart girl like you should understand the content of the contract, so you can also choose not to accept it. Just treat last night as a beautiful memory. Of course, if you encounter any problems in the future, I will help you appropriately." Penelope's eyes were filled with struggle. Of course, she knew what Eric meant by contract. After hesitating for a while, the girl suddenly asked, "Eric, how much money is in it?" Eric's mouth flashed a triumphant smile and said, "I didn't deposit any money in it, but I remember that the highest overdraft limit should be $50 million US. When Penelope heard the figure of 50 million, her hand, which was originally on her knee, couldn't help but tremble. As a girl born in an ordinary family in Spain, she had been looking forward to living a decent and wealthy life since she was a child. However, so far, the largest amount of money she had personally experienced was the remuneration for Thunderbolt Beauty that she had yet to receive. Although Firefly paid her $250,000 US, after deducting the tax, agent's share, and expenses in Los Angeles, it was estimated that she would only receive a few tens of thousands of US. However, even this amount of money was enough to make Penelope secretly happy for a long time. After all, The remuneration she received from the movies in Spain was less than $10,000. And now, after just one night, a credit card worth $50 million fell in front of her. Before seeing the luxurious life in Hollywood, even if this amount was subtracted by a zero, Penelope felt that it was worth it to sell herself. Penelope raised her hand again and suddenly asked, "Eric, what if it's lost?" Eric laughed out loud. "If it's lost, just report it and then get another one. You don't think that it really belongs to whoever finds it, right?" Penelope smiled awkwardly and didn't hesitate anymore. She quickly reached out her small hand and took the card. She placed it in the palm of her hand and curiously rubbed it. "Remember, this is a contract. Once you sign it, you can't go back on it. You still have one chance. Before you leave the Point Manor, if you feel that it's inappropriate, just leave the card here." "Eric, I've already thought about it." The Spanish girl didn't hesitate to lean over and hug Eric's arm like a cat. Eric pinched the girl's sharp chin and said, "Think about it again." Penelope didn't respond. Instead, she continued to rub Eric's arm and said, "Eric, it's still early. You're definitely not in a hurry to catch the plane, right?" Eric ignored the girl's hint. He got up and said, "I have to go to the company first. Let's go, help me pack my luggage." Penelope looked at Eric's unmoved figure and stood up in disappointment. She thought for a moment and suddenly walked up to Eric and said, "Eric, there's something I want to ask you for help with." "What?" I want my sister to come to America to study." Eric suddenly stopped and turned to look at Penelope. He saw a flash of guilt in the girl's eyes and suddenly smiled. "Of course, no problem. What's your sister's name?" "Her name is Monica." "Oh." Eric nodded calmly and said, "Just wait for my call. I'll get someone to contact you." After Eric finished speaking, he didn't continue to ask. Penelope followed behind Eric and gently waved her small fist. "Even if I can't catch this man, what if I have a sister who looks like me?" With this thought in mind, the Spanish girl began to think of some small schemes. Of course, she couldn't see that Eric, who was walking in front of her, also had a slightly playful smile on his face. "This is really interesting." Eric couldn't help but think. Some images of Monica Cruz flashed in his mind. To be honest, the Spanish sisters were really not much different from twins except for their age. At 9 o'clock, Eric took a car and left the Pointed Corner Manor on time. The Spanish girl was obviously reluctant to leave immediately and stayed there alone. Eric wasn't worried. With Penelope's shrewdness, she definitely wouldn't do anything out of line. Eric went to Firefly's headquarters to arrange some things. Then, he took the Disney Group's chartered plane to New York. He stayed in New York for a few hours to visit the two little guys who still lived in Long Island. Only then did he leave again amidst Virginia's complaints and fly directly to Berlin, Germany. Berlin time was 9 hours later than Los Angeles time. Eric left on July 2nd. After more than 20 hours of flight, he arrived in Berlin at 5 o'clock in the morning on July 4th. This day happened to be Independence Day in the United States. Of course, it definitely had nothing to do with Germany. However, because of this incident, Eric remembered another thing. It seemed that the title of the next script he prepared for Roland Emmerich, Independence Day, was in the hands of another film company. In the original space-time, there were many disputes because of this title. Although the project Independence Day had been revealed to the outside world, Firefly had not officially announced the title of the movie. After settling down in Berlin, Eric promptly called Los Angeles and asked Firefly's production department to pay attention to this matter. Eric was not too worried. In the original space-time, the title of Independence Day was originally Earth Defense War. Sometime before the movie was released, the film company finally obtained the authorship rights and set the premiere on July 4th. It was basically a gimmick. Of course, this gimmick also played a certain marketing role, but it was definitely not necessary. If the film company with the authorship rights demanded an exorbitant price, Eric would not insist on being a sucker and insist on getting the title. The premiere in Berlin did not have any surprises or waves. The The Firefly branch in Germany arranged everything in an orderly manner. After Eric arrived in Berlin, he simply understood some of the procedures before the premiere and smoothly completed everything that followed. Before Jurassic Park was released in Germany, it had already caused a worldwide sensation because of its amazing box office and realistic CG special effects. In addition, the German branch spared no effort in the operation. Unsurprisingly, the movie also quickly broke box office records in the German market one after another. You're tuning in to the Narrate and Escape YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.